Hello everybody, my name is Tauqeer Zafar and today I will be discussing with you History Optional Paper 2. In the last session I have discussed the Paper 1 and now it is the time for a discussion for Paper 2. Let us see the kind of question that was asked in Paper 2. Paper 2 Section A. Critically examine the following statements in about 150 words. Okay, 10 into 5. There are 5 questions and carrying 10 marks each. The introduction of Western education transformed in India in unforeseen way. So here they have asked about the impact of Western education. See, if you try to understand the impact of Western education, see, with the establishment of British rule, British colonial rule, there was, introduction of Western education. See how this is happening, because see, British rule was British colonial rule, and there was impact of this colonial rule which was positive as well as negative. There are mainly negative impact, but yes, this positive impact was the Western education, which is a very important impact. And in this Western education, what happens? See, when the British came to India, the British East India Company, and before that, the Christian missionaries also coming to India, and the responsibility of the Christian missionaries, the objective of the Christian missionaries was to spread the Christianity. And in the garb of spreading Christianity, they act as a good informer to the colonial rule also, the Britishers. But at the same time, we find the positive aspect of these Christian missionaries, that they were taking the responsibility of spreading Western education, especially, English language and the spread of Western culture. See, the British period was divided into 3 phases. From 1757 to 1813, it was a period of Orientalist. When the Orientalists were interested, the scholars who were interested in studying the Eastern civilization. And then from 1813 to 1858, it was a period of utilitarians. Utilitarians focus on greatest happiness for greater number of people. And that is why we find the impact of the utilitarians like, James Mill, J.S. Mill, and, Jeremy Bentham. And that time, these impacts were seen in the Governor Generals. Moreover, there was Anglicist also coming in this period, and they wanted that English education should be the most important aspect of India's education. And they gave rise to progressive development. Since Western education was introduced in India, it was marked by the important progressive ideals of the West, the ideas of John Locke, the Enlightenment ideas of Kant, Rousseau, Montesquieu, Voltaire, and there was development of an ideological base. So all this is happening because of the British rule, all this is happening because of the British colonial power. The positive impact is Western education. And these ideologies which were emanated from the Enlightenment ideas were basically, influencing the Indian national movement also, because it was creating an ideological base, and they were working as a fuel in the fire in the Indian national movement, whether it is the liberty, equality, fraternity, the idea of republicanism, democracy, parliamentary form of government, the idea of glorious revolution of 1688, the ideas of French Revolution, that is the liberty, equality and fraternity, American Revolution, the spirit of freedom, the concept of popular sovereignty. All this was also coming through Western education, especially the English education. And English education was propagated because of the impact of the Anglicist, especially the person by the name of Macaulay. Macaulay was considered as the father of English education, and that is why the educated Indians read about the American and French Revolution, and the impact on them was also that they wanted to introduce these kind of ideals in India. And the hearts of the educated Indians were filled with the ideas of liberty, equality and justice. So the ideas of John Locke, the ideas of Rousseau, the ideas of Hobbes inspired the people, the educated Indians. And the people now wanted to establish the modern political ideals in India, and it was also helping in Indian national movement. Like we see in the case of the period of moderates, they were inspired by the ideas of Western, they were inspired by the Enlightenment ideas, they were inspired by the lofty and progressive principles of Enlightenment, the ideas of John Locke, the ideas of Hobbes, the ideas of Rousseau, the ideas of American and French Revolution, two important revolutions which resulted into the foundation of the modern political ideals. English education was a very important thing. And further we see the development of civil service, the changes in the constitution. Most of the constitution, the provision of the constitution was impacted by the Government of India Act 1935. We see in the preamble of Indian Constitution the ideals of those lofty principles are there. For example, liberty, equality, fraternity, justice, all this. So educated Indians were inspired. The English education was considered to be the number one language, and the colonial language though, and French language, for example, the second popular language in the world. So that also spread in India. And the development of scientific education, the development of education on the lines of Western culture or on the lines of the modern ideals was seen in the case of the British education in India. And they have introduced the school, colleges, universities, degree courses and other things. So educated Indians also became acquainted with the concept of self-rule and democracy. Indians started to demand independence from the British in order to establish the democratic rule in India. English became a common language. People from different regions could now communicate in English, and this helped in breaking the regional barriers and unified the country. The development of press was also a very important factor. Introduction of Western education had some limitations too. It has some flaws too. It has disassociated the Indian people from their tradition. The more importance was given by the Westerners, and they started glorifying the Western education and not they started overshadowing the Eastern education, especially Hindi and other vernacular languages. But definitely it has a very important impact in the life of the Indians. Western education led to the development of education in India. It led to the development of moderate class. it led to the development of constitution, it led to the development of institution, it led to the development of rule of law and other things. So the intellectual awakening and finally which resulted in the growth of nationalism is a very important aspect of Western education. So all these points you need to mention here. So that is why it has transformed India in an unforeseen way. So it was a blessing in disguise for Indians. You should write this point also. The British colonial rule was a blessing in disguise for Indians. Okay, so it is a very, easy question that was definitely it was discussed in the class, and it was, it brings into light about the important aspects of modern political system. अब जो दूसरा क्वेश्चन है, let us take another question. Tipu Sultan had little success in setting forth a course of change significantly different from general experience of 18th century crisis of Indian politics and society, where public life tended over and over to become the system of plundering. So this question is based on especially in Tipu Sultan, and Tipu Sultan is always in the news. From the last couple of years, we are seeing that Tipu Sultan. Yesterday also, I was reading a news on Tipu Sultan. So it is obvious that the UPSC will ask question related to Tipu Sultan. See, Tipu Sultan was the successor of Hyder Ali. Hyder Ali was the founder of Mysore state in India. See, in 18th century India, see, the question has two aspects. The crisis in 18th century, crisis in 18th century India, and this was termed as a dark age by Colonial school of thought, Cambridge school of thought, and the paint India 18th century in dark. And during this time there was decline of the Mughal Empire, the mighty Mughal Empire, and the rise of the regional powers. For example, Bengal, Mysore, Awadh, Hyderabad, Karnataka, etc. And because of the rise of the regional powers, there was complex power struggle that was going on, which was causing political turmoil in India. And there was no central authority. There was decadent politico-administrative machinery. There was rotten socio-economic structure, and there was decline in the central tendency. So that is why when the British came to India, they confronted with these problems and they established their rule, because they came as a trader, they became conqueror, and finally they became the ruler. So we see that the crisis in 18th century, one of the important aspect of 18th century was the foreign invasion. Loot and plunder were the main aspect of the 18th century. The foreign invasion, for example, the attack of Nadir Shah in 1739, then Ahmad Shah Abdali. Then there is another aspect of 18th century crisis was that there was quick succession in the Mughal Empire after the fall of Aurangzeb in 1707. We see after the fall of Aurangzeb in 1707, there was quick successions in the Mughal Empire. And there was, decline in the whole structure that was happening. And there was rise of autonomous state. One of the autonomous state was Mysore. So as far as Tipu Sultan, so एक पहलू आपको ये बताना है कि इंडिया में 18th सेंचुरी में क्या सीन चल रहा था. दूसरे पहलू में टीपू सुल्तान के बारे में बताना है. मतलब सेकेंड पार्ट विल बी टीपू सुल्तान. See, both contemporary and modern historians have expressed, contradictory opinions regarding the character and abilities of Tipu. The one, you can say, the viewpoint is that he was a cruel tyrant and Muslim fanatic. He was a proud man who expressed his views concerning science, medicine, engineering, trade, etc. And he got khutbah read not in the name of Mughal emperor, who was, recognized as de jure sovereign in India, but in his own name. So we see that it is said that Hyder Ali was the founder of the Mysore state and he made no innovation. But, Tipu lost the empire with innovation. He did innovation, but he lost the empire. That shows that he had little success in setting forth the course of change in the history. And he has achievements at his disposal. One aspect says that Tipu was a tyrant. One aspect says that he is a progressive. Despite he was a progressive person, even then Mysore failed. He has lost his empire. Tipu and Hyder were involved in 4 Anglo-Mysore war. First Anglo-Mysore war and second Anglo-Mysore war. First Anglo-Mysore war, Hyder was involved. Second Anglo-Mysore war in 1780 to 84. First in 1767 to 69. And third Anglo-Mysore war 1790 to 92. And fourth Anglo-Mysore war in 1799. In all these Mysore war, Tipu was not victorious. Though he tried his level best, but he failed in saving the empire of Mysore. So there are varied, opinion of the historians. See, it is said that Tipu played an important role. So in this question, you have to write some of the achievements of Tipu. Tipu was a courageous and determined soldier and a fearless commander. His power was seriously, crippled in Third Anglo-Mysore War, which ended in the signing of the Treaty of Srirangapatnam. And when he lost his empire, half of the territories were taken and 2 of his sons were taken as hostage. So yet, he refused to accept his failure. And he came back in the 4th Anglo-Mysore War, but finally he was defeated. And he took the help of French and, Turkey and, other Muslim rulers. His determination to fight the English, even single-handedly, was a unique example in the politics of India and South India. So Tipu was capable and laborious ruler. As a domestic ruler, he sustains an advantageous, comparison with the greatest prince of East. Many persons, such as Moore and other, scholars described that agriculture flourished during his period. Peasantry of that period was happy with his policies. The state enjoyed the prosperity and peace during the regime of Tipu. There was, a person by the name of Sir John Shore. He wrote that, the peasantry of his dominions were protected. Their labors were encouraged and rewarded. Tipu took measures to bring improvement in currency, improvements in weights and measures, and other spheres of administration. Of course, Tipu was a despot, but he looked after the welfare of his subjects. So we cannot say that, he had a little success. He had a success, but the problem with the Tipu was there was a nexus that was created against him. The nexus of Nizam of Hyderabad, Marathas and British. There was a complex power struggle going on in South India. So that the nexus of the Nizam of Hyderabad, Marathas and British, they all got together, especially at the time of Cornwallis, who came from America. He was the he was the British commander in America and he failed during American War of Independence. और उसके बाद जो frustration उसने निकाला है Third Anglo-Mysore War में, that was commendable. So he made a nexus, Cornwallis, and defeated Tipu. Tipu and Hyder Ali, they wanted that there should be a nexus of the Indian power so that they can oust the British from India. So Tipu का थोड़ा आपको लिखना पड़ेगा personality and his, achievements, what all things he did. So Tipu was, not so much successful as his father, Hyder Ali. Yet, he was fairly successful ruler. His failure against English, however, does not, allow him his rightful place in Indian history. Because in politics that time was, becoming very ugly. And I told you that there was nexus that was created against him by the British. And he became the victim of the British imperial power. And finally, Mysore came under the clutch of British imperialism. So the situation in 18th century was a crisis situation, but Tipu tried his level best. He was a person who was celebrating the ideals of the French Revolution. He was a person who has planted tree of liberty in the capital of Seringampatnam. And there are many things which can be discussed, but those things, in this question, you don't have to. You have to highlight the success of Tipu, little success or whatever it is, and also mention the 18th century crisis. And you have to write that the defeat of Tipu happened because of what? Why he lost the empire? Because of the politics that was growing and the continuous and the consistent objective of the British to defeat, the Indian powers. What the Britishers were doing? They defeated Mysore by taking the help of Maratha and Nizam, and finally they defeated Maratha also. After the first, Anglo-Maratha War from 1775 to 1782, there was a treaty called as Treaty of Salbai, which gave 20 years peace to to British from Maratha, and then they exerted pressure on Mysore. So you have to defend him that what all things was actually done during his time. तो आपको कहीं ना कहीं डिफेंड करना है कि किस तरह से हुआ. So दो एस्पेक्ट आप मेंशन कीजिए एंड देन द आंसर इज ओवर. Next, Vernacular Press Act of 1878 was designed for better control of vernacular press and to empower the government with more effective means of punishing and repressing seditious writing. See, this question comes from, I taught it in British press policies. British press policies. The press was playing a very important role in India, both in English and in, in vernacular languages. Press was a tool to spread the idea of nationalism and nationalistic consciousness in the different parts of the world, in different parts of India, and somehow it was unifying Indians. They were criticizing, the Indian press was criticizing the imperial policies of the British. And that is why the British wanted to curb this nationalism and growing Hindu-Muslim unity by curbing the press. That is why they did regulation of press. So you have to write regulation of press. First you will be writing that what was the role of press in few lines. And then you write why the British regulated, because they wanted to curb this national consciousness or nationalistic feelings which was growing at its pace because of the press that was, criticizing the British imperial power, exposing their weak policies and highlighting the problems of the Indians, that the subjects are not happy with the British imperial power, the British government. So in a case we see, that is why we see that there were regulations done by the British in order to curb the nationalism, because they used to consider that the press is doing seditious work. They are writing against the government and provoking the subject against the government. So their writings were considered as seditious writing by the government. That is why they passed press laws. Strict licensing regulation, for example, that was the first regulation that was passed and which has, banned the paper of Rajaram Mohan Roy, Miratul Akhbar. And then, later we see Vernacular Press Act in the time of Lytton. Lytton was a strict imperialist and he passed Vernacular Press Act. Whoever writes against the government, जो कोई भी गवर्नमेंट के खिलाफ लिखेगा, that press, the license of that press will be taken and the seditious act will be applied on them. The Vernacular Press Act was called as a gagging act. Gagging means to keep someone, to stop someone to speak. So Lytton was a great imperialist and his forward policy was responsible for the tragedy of the Second Afghan War. This was a very important aspect of Lytton. And he also passed Vernacular Press Act. Vernacular Press Act, empowered a magistrate with a previous, sanction of the provincial government to require a printer or publisher to deposit a security or enter into a bond binding himself not to print or publish anything, which could incite the feelings of the people against the government. So the government was, authorized to warn the people of India who were publishing the papers in vernacular language because it was inciting the subject. So Vernacular Press Act was passed by Lytton. This is a very important aspect of Lytton's imperialist policy. It was a very important aspect that how this Vernacular Press Act was creating problem for the Indians to write against the government, the imperial policies of the government. So here you should make the examiner understand that what is this Vernacular Press Act. First you will make the examiner understand that what is the objective of this British policy or the regulation of press, why it was done, why the regulation of press was done by the British. See, a very unfortunate, legacy of rebellion of 1857 was there. And in the revolt of 1857, we have seen that Hindu-Muslim unity found an expression. We have seen that nationalism was reaching to its level, though it is a debatable topic that whether it was a nationalist revolt or not. But even then, it was bringing the different sections of Indian together to fight against the British. Vernacular press, which had, developed and grown on an unprecedented scale since 1857. And this was making the Indians vocal against the government policies. They were criticizing the government. They were exposing the weak policies of the government and somehow inculcating a sense of nationalism in the mind of the people against the British government so that they can stand and rise, against the British. That is why we see that Lytton was passing this Vernacular Press Act, which was a gagging act. Okay, in the vernacular press, they were exposing the terrible famine of 1876-78, which, took a toll of over 6 million people. And, lavish expenditure was done on the Delhi Darbar, the imperial Delhi Darbar, which happened in 1877 and which created a public opinion against the British government. And it was all, made public to the people. So when Lytton comes to power, he passed Vernacular Press Act. And this was to suppress the Indian press. This was to suppress the vernacular press. This was to suppress the nationalistic consciousness that was growing. And you know what has happened? It was able to, it actually, created more nationalism in India. Like that was happened in the case of partition of Bengal, which created more nationalism. Nationalistic consciousness spread, though it was to curb nationalism and Hindu-Muslim unity. So all these things that you need to write in this question. So it is a very easy question. It was done in British press policy. Let us take a look of next question. The rise of communist movement in India in 1920s lent a militant and revolutionary content to the trade union movement. See, this question is also very easy. See, revolutionary movement, refers to the movement of the young nationalist who believed in the efficacy of the violent methods to overthrow the British rule from India. The revolutionaries, believed in the cult of bombs and pistols and had faith in efficacy of, the aggressive means to fight against, and they had no faith in the peaceful method of moderates and the passive methods of the extremist. So revolutionary movement, it rose in the time of, the period of the early years of 20th century, that is from 1903 to 1915, and then from 1920s to 1930s. So here what you have to write, इसमें देखिए क्या चीजें लिखनी है. कहता है the rise of communist movement in India. See how this rise of communist movement is happening, because you see, you have to write that Russian Revolution that has happened in 1917, especially the Bolshevik Revolution. And this Bolshevik Revolution, here communist ideals were invoked by Lenin. And there was establishment of a communist regime. The communism says that, there will be the establishment of proletariat system, the dictatorship of proletariat, and the equitable distribution of wealth. It was against capitalistic mode of production. This is what Marx says. It has emanated from the ideas of Marx. The communism was the principles that was, comes from the ideas of Marx, and it was inculcated by Lenin. And though Lenin deviated from Marxian ideology, and he has established the communist ideals in the form of Bolshevik government that was against Kerensky's government that we have done in world history when I was discussing the Russian Revolution, and finally communist regime was established. When communist regime was established, it was a regime which was, spreading, which had the objective to spread the communism. And this communism they came to India as well. India में भी ये communism जो है spread करने लगा. And since this communism was spreading in India as well, it was, creating a kind of, you can say, the communist movement. And see, in 1917, the Comintern, was established, settled in Russia under Lenin. and communist regime was established. Pre-1917, the trade union associations were formed in India, and it was based on the socialism and was influenced and acquired the radical form when communism also came to India after the Russian Revolution, especially the Bolshevik Revolution. So the question says what? The question says that rise of communist movement in India. This is happening how? After the development of communism and communist regime in Russia, and the Communist Party were established, especially in the time of, M.N. Roy and Abani Mukherjee, and several communist entities were formed in India in 1920s, lent a militant and revolutionary content. Why this is happening? That why they lent the militant and nationalistic conscious militant and revolutionary content? Because see, the trade union association which was there pre-1917 was not that radical. But after 1917, whatever trade union movement which was a pressure group based on communism, it became very radical. Especially we see in the case of 1920, All India Trade Union Congress was formed under the presidency of Lala Lajpat Rai. The communist movement in India, the group of workers, and these group of workers were, carrying out the movement. This trade union movement were carrying out the movement on the basis of communism. And this communism is emanating from 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. Bolshevik Revolution se. Bolshevik Revolution is one of the part of stages of Russian Revolution of 1917. So this is inculcating this radicalism in the trade union movement. So three things you have to deal. One is the 1917 Russian Revolution, that is Bolshevik Revolution, and spread of communism, and the spread of communism in India. It came to India. And second thing that was happening was the rise of trade union movement. This trade union movement was pre-1917, but after 1917, after we find this communism which came to India, it started influencing the trade union movement. One more aspect was revolutionary extremist movement, that which is called as revolutionary terrorist movement. It was also developing in 1903 to 1915 in the first phase, and in the second phase from 1920s to 1930s, we see that this phase of revolutionary terrorism was very much influenced by communism. We see Bhagat Singh was a communist. He was influenced by communist ideals, and we see that this revolutionary terrorist movement, which was very aggressive and was working on the cult of bombs and pistols, they were influencing this kind of trade union movement. They were influencing this ideology, which is a mature phase of the revolutionary extremism of Bhagat Singh and other comrades. Bhagat Singh was very much inspired by Lenin, and Lenin was a follower of communism. So we see after 1917, they were very much influenced, and they were influencing the trade union movement which was developing after 1917 and getting a radical shape. So you see the connection, 1700 and 1917 communism, and this communism has a link with Marx also. And Marx के जो disciple है, ideological disciple, वो कौन है? Lenin है. Lenin is carrying this Bolshevik revolution, And this communism is spreading in India, and in India, M.N. Roy and others, Abani Mukherjee, there were many, Abani Mukherjee, Satya Bhakte, कई सारे घाटे, कई सारे लोग, they were influencing this. They were influencing this. After First World War, we see Subhash and Bhagat, they also, were socialist. Anushilan Samiti, in 1925, they learned the technique of bomb making in 1925 from Russia. So somehow these communists were, which is connected to the trade union, and they were also involved, we see the communist ideals. The communists were involved in the second phase of the revolutionary extremism, like the different conspiracy cases that we study. So, इस पहलू को मेंशन कीजिए, इस पहलू को मेंशन कीजिए, इस पहलू को मेंशन कीजिए, तीनों को कनेक्ट करने की कोशिश कीजिए कि कम्युनिज्म किस तरह से निकल के आया लेनिन के समय से. इट इज इन्फ्लुएंस्ड इंडिया and there was rise of communist movement, rise of left जिसको कहते हैं. Then there, at the same time, there was rise of trade union movement, how communism was making trade union movement radical. And then you see this radical form, this aggressive form of nationalism, which was revolutionary extremism in the second phase, were also influenced by communism and was, somehow influencing the trade union movement. So you have to make the connection between the three things: trade union movement, rise of communism in India, rise of left in India, and the revolutionary extremism in the second phase from 1920s to 30s. This is what you have to write in this particular question. Ab padhiye. The rise of communist movement in India in 1920s lent a militant and revolutionary content to trade union movement. And trade union movement was one of the movement which was, helping in the Indian national movement. Though it had, their own aim, they keep on wavering from the Indian national movement. They had some allegiance with Communist International. The Communist Party of India also had some allegiance with the Communist International, and they somehow having some difference with Congress, and they keep on wavering. Though again it is a topic of, it is a debatable topic. So you don't have to write much about it in the exam, except showing the connection, how each other is influencing, how these are influencing each other. Uske baad, the next question. तो कितने क्वेश्चन हो गया एक बार जरा देख लूं मैं. A, B, C, D is also done. Then E. In the first decade of 20th century, the atmosphere was ripe for emergence of revolutionary groups to fill up the vacant space in the political map of India, of country, sorry. अब देखिए, first decade of 20th century, what is happening? It is indicating towards rise of extremism. It is indicating towards rise of extremism. And this rise of extremism or rise of the revolutionary terrorist activities, it happened in phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 from 1903 to 1915. Phase 2 from 1920s to 1930s. In some book you will find 1901 to 1918. कई जगह आपको 1901 से 18 तक दिखेगा. तो इसकी बात कर रहा है, ये phase 1 की बात कर रहा है. See, till this time, see, there was growth of nationalism, there was foundation of Indian National Congress, there was rise of moderates, in this phase. And then, in reaction to the moderates and their principles, their ideologies, their methodologies, there was a rise of extremism. Though there are factors for the rise of extremism, and in reaction to the extremist, which was also the part of Congress, there was a non-Congress movement that started in the initial years of the first decade of 20th century, was revolutionary terrorist movement. So the term revolutionary terrorist movement refers to the movement of young nationalists who believed in efficacy of violent methods to overthrow the British rule from India, and they were frustrated from both moderates and extremists, and in reaction to them they rose in the first decade of 20th century. They believed in the cult of bombs and pistols and had no faith in the efficacy of peaceful method followed by Congress. That is why they emerged on the non-Congress platform. And revolutionary believed that the British rule could be overthrown by using violent methods, by militant methods. And that is why in the first decade of 20th century they emerged. So the factors were that revolutionary terrorist movement was the product of the prevailing politico-administrative, economic and socio-cultural condition that was there in India. The exploitative character of the British played a very important role in the birth of revolutionary terrorist movement. Moreover, we see that the economic hardship faced by Indian masses also played an important role in giving birth to the revolutionary activities. There were international factors also involved. That also we do when I was teaching you in the class. I told you the international factors were also involved, and the failure of moderates and extremists created a void and space, and that space was occupied by the revolutionary extremist. So when the British Indian administration failed to satisfy the Indian aspiration and continued its colonial policies, then Indian youth decided to take the matter in their own hand and started using violent methods. The repressive policies of the British also played an important role. The government enacted the imperial laws which was curbing the Indian nationalism, was also an important factor. The restrictions on press also becomes a factor. The Vernacular Press Act also becomes a factor. So the younger generation of India in the opening years of 20th century wanted quicker result. They cannot wait for long. And the younger generation, since they wanted quicker result, and this section of young nationalists were dissatisfied with the gradual reforms being raised by Indian mainstream nationalist leaders, and they were neither satisfied with moderates nor with the extremists. Because of all this, the young nationalists developed their faith in violent methods. Failure of moderates and extremists becomes a very important reason, because it created a gap, a void, and that void was filled by the revolutionary extremist or revolutionary terrorist movement in the first decade of the 20th century. इस तरह से इनका राइज हुआ है, समझ रहे हैं? तो राइज कैसे हुआ है ये आपसे वो पूछने की कोशिश कर रहा है. क्या बोलता है? इन द फर्स्ट डिकेड ऑफ 20th century the atmosphere was ripe for the emergence of revolutionary groups which filled up the vacant space in the political map of India. तो ये आपको बताना है. It was marked by the cult of bombs and pistols. ये सबसे important चीज है. Revolutionary believed in the cult of bombs and pistols, and they had full faith in the violent methods. They want quick results. That is why this has happened. इसीलिए ये सारी चीजें, इसीलिए आप देख रहे हैं कि जो है शुरू हो गया ये सब काम. चापेकर ब्रदर्स जो है, they assassinated the two unpopular, British officials in Pune. And, Abhinav Bharat in 1904, Mitra Mela, which was a secret society of, revolutionaries, were formed by V.D. Savarkar and his brother Ganesh. And, other prominent revolutionary groups like, Yugandhar group in Calcutta, Anushilan Samiti in Dhaka. After 1905, many prominent newspapers, advocated revolutionary terrorism like, Sadhya and Yugandhar in Bengal. Then, in 1907, an attempt was made on the life of, Lieutenant Governor of Bengal. In 1908, in April, Praful Chakki and Khudiram Bose threw the, bomb at a carriage which they believe was occupied by the unpopular, British magistrate, and his name was Kingsford, Douglas Kingsford, who was the district judge of Muzaffarpur, and ended up in killing two English women traveling in it. So all these methods of individual sacrifice attacking the Britishers were what? Were the efforts made by the revolutionary extremists in the initial years of 20th century. ये सारी चीजें चल रही थी, समझ रहे हैं? So this is what you have to write. This is very easy. We have done this in revolutionary extremism, which was an important aspect in Indian national movement. We covered in the history optional paper in the class. India had been the world leader in the field of hand-spun and hand-woven yarn and cloth from many centuries. Many nationalists and Marxist critics considered that British dominion deliberately shattered the traditional and world-famous handicraft industries. Comment. This is a direct question for from deindustrialization, which is a part of the impact of the British rule on Indian economy. Why this is happening? See, with the rise of the modern industries in England, when industrial revolution happened in second half of 18th century, industrial revolution happened in the second half of 18th century. Okay, and this gave rise to modern industries. Modern industries in India. In Britain. Because industrial revolution happened in Britain for the first time, and that is why they started making colonies, and the hungry machines required raw material and market. So modern industries, and they started, selling the industrial goods. They started selling industrial goods in the colonies. India was one of the colonies. And when these industrial goods used to come to India, it was giving a challenge to the indigenous industries, small scale and handicraft industries, cottage industries. They were being challenged by the modern goods and resulted into deindustrialization. Because, people started buying the foreign goods. Earlier, India was the workshop of the, world. But later on, it was converted into the colonial, it became a colony, and, how there was decline in the small scale and cottage industry. So India had a long history of, flourishing and prosperous industrial centers in the various parts of the country. And Indian products were sold throughout the world. I told you it was the workshop of the world. But the industrial revolution which happened in Britain and the coming of the foreign goods, and which gave a severe challenge to the indigenous goods, resulting into deindustrialization. So there was decline in Indian handicraft. There was decline in Indian handicraft and small scale industries, resulting into deindustrialization. So in order to fulfill the requirement of the colonial rule, artisans and craftsmen were exploited in number of ways. They were forced to sell their products, at a cheaper price to the companies, merchants on one hand, and on the other hand, the artisans and craftsmen. The artisans and, craftsmen were forced to purchase the raw material from companies, merchant. This was also one of the factors for the decline of, and they could not afford. Imagine, India is a rich country inhabited by poor people. There were tons of raw material which was taken at cheap or throwaway price from India, and because India was a colony, and it was converted into finished goods and were sold in the colony India, because India was a big market for the British products. So these resulted into deindustrialization. These resulted into deindustrialization. Drain of wealth, plays a very important role in this, with the decline of Indian handicrafts. Drain of wealth, because the raw material and how the British products were sold. All this resulted, there was decline in the indigenous industries. There was severe decline in the indigenous industries, shutting off the small scale and cottage industries. The deposed ruling chiefs, they could not sponsor or give patronage to the indigenous artisans and craftsmen. Earlier they used to get. So the decline of handicrafts contributed significantly in creating a circumstance responsible for recurring famines also in the later times. Decline of handicrafts wiped away the difference between the rural and urban areas. Earlier, the urban handicrafts were flourishing condition in urban centers. But with the advent of the modern goods, the modern industrial goods resulted in the fall of the indigenous cottage and small scale industries. So the Indian handicraft industry, you have to write this, that the Indian handicraft industry was one of the important, factor for economic prosperity of India throughout the ages. And with the decline of this handicraft, adversely, affected the prosperity of India. काफी सारी इंडस्ट्री को झटका लगा है. Lots of industries, indigenous industries, they were, suffering. Cotton textile industries, was the most affected industries. It employed, the largest number of people in different stages. And, there was impact on carding, spinning, weaving, printing, dyeing, painting, कई सारी चीजों में नुकसान हो रहा था. Before 1800, India was the largest producer of cotton and cotton goods. There was tremendous growth of cotton industries in England, which gave a challenge, and that was developed in Manchester with the Industrial Revolution, and that was challenging the indigenous goods. So the indigenous goods, the cotton textile industries in India had a setback. Another, important industries which experienced the destruction was jute industries in Bengal, with the growth of, the jute manufacturing center at Dundee in Scotland, which, adversely affected the growth of the indigenous industries. Wool में हुआ है, the wool industry of India was also affected. British promoted, the export of raw wool. Its value gradually, increased, and they promoted the import of wool products. Silk industry also came under severe, it also became the victim of the industrial revolution in the modern industries. And silk industry witnessed destruction in Bengal, which was, largely dependent on exports. सिल्क इंडस्ट्री को झटका पहुंचा, आयरन एंड स्टील इंडस्ट्री को झटका पहुंचा, कई सारी इंडस्ट्रीज को झटका पहुंचा है. And this is happening because of the rise of the modern industries. This is happening because of the rise of modern industries and the coming of the goods into India. That is why it is said India had been world leader in the field of hand spun and hand woven yarn and cloth from many countries. Many nationalist and Marxist critics considered that British dominion deliberately shattered the traditional and world famous handicrafts of India. It is clearly indicating that you have to write the factors for deindustrialization and you have to write the impact of deindustrialization on various industries, including focusing more on cotton and textile industries and, other industries. A special focus on the, the hand spun and hand woven yarn, which was earlier famous, but with the rise of the British imperialism in India, it has resulted into the problem. इसकी वजह से बहुत जबरदस्त प्रॉब्लम होना शुरू हो गया. So it is clear. So it is very easy question. थोड़ा बड़ा है, ज़्यादा लिखना पड़ेगा इसमें. And it was direct also. What were the various ways in which nationalism manifests itself in India during colonial rule? See, it is a very general question. काफी जनरल क्वेश्चन है. अलग अलग फॉर्म में कैसे नेशनलिज्म जो है मैनिफेस्ट किया है. That is, the how it was vocal in the different, aspect. अलग अलग एस्पेक्ट में कैसे ये वोकल हो गया है. That is, you have to start with, the growth of nationalism. इसमें आप लिखिए growth of nationalism. And it acquired different shape and different, different aspects. Growth of nationalism. With the foundation of Indian National Congress, there was development of moderate democratic politics. ये लिखना है आपको. Then there was, in reaction to this, there was extremist phase that began. Then revolutionary extremism that began. Then home rule movement that began. Then Praja Mandal movement that also was one of the ways. अभी सबको बता दूंगा थोड़ा थोड़ा. Home rule movement, Praja Mandal movement, revolutionary extremism in two phases. First phase 1903 to 1915. Second phase Bhagat Singh phase 1920s to 1930s. प्रजा मंडल मूवमेंट, होम रूल के बाद गांधीयन फेज. ये सब क्या है? गांधीयन फेज में यू विल बी राइटिंग द नॉन कॉपरेशन मूवमेंट सिविल डिसोबीडियंस मूवमेंट, CDM, क्विट इंडिया मूवमेंट, और क्या है, और भी एस्पेक्ट्स हैं, कई सारे एस्पेक्ट्स हैं जो आप मेंशन कर सकते हैं. देन आफ्टर दैट the rise of left and trade union movement, rise of left and trade union movement. This is one of the aspect. Then you have the rise of left is there, then trade union movement is there, then we have the women becoming the part of national movement. Then non-Congress platform, role of Subhash Chandra Bose, and INA movement. Then RIN mutiny, Royal Indian Navy mutiny, which was the last nail in the coffin of the British imperial power. Then one movement that was left there was Swarajist. ये इतने सारे growth of nationalism के साथ which developed in 1885 with the foundation of Indian National Congress. Then one is the moderate democratic politics, which was based on liberal ideology, democratic principles, prayers and petitions, becoming the part of the government and demanding for the, demanding for dominion status, legal methods, constitutional methods. Drain of wealth was, and economic nationalism was one of the major contribution, and other contributions were also there. It was one of the ways. They were the founding fathers of the Indian National Congress, the moderates. Then comes the period of extremists, which was in reaction to moderates, and they played an important role in the Congress politics, and they played a very important role in Swadeshi movement. They were against partition of Bengal. They carried out the thought process of boycott and Swadeshi. Extremist movement. They were working on the principle of, the aggression, radicalism. They were following extra constitutional and extra legal methods. They were willing to involve the masses in the Indian national movement. So this was one of the phase. Then revolutionary terrorism. These were Congress. ये सब Congress है. Revolutionary extremist movement, which was on a non-Congress platform, and it was in reaction with the slow process of moderate democratic politics and the passive resistance of extremist politics. And they wanted quick results and working on the principle of cults of bombs and pistols. So it was also one of the ways of nationalism. And I told you it developed in two phases. First phase, second phase. Second phase was marked by the principles of communism in the time of Bhagat Singh, Rajguru and other comrades. So it was also, one of the ways of Indian national movement. Then, Home Rule movement, which was also, this was C, non-Congress platform. NC, ये सब Congress है, C is Congress. Home Rule, non-Congress, by Annie Besant and Tilak, two wings of Home Rule. It also played an important role in the Indian national movement and resulted into the passing of the Government of India Act, that is Montagu-Chelmsford Reform in 1919. In this, Annie Besant plays a very important role, because after the revolutionary extremism of first phase, there was decline in the national movement and the political activity was converted into passivity. So again, to revive the political activity, the Home Rule movement was carried out in 1916 under the leadership of Annie Besant and Tilak. One of the aspects of the national movement was Prajamandal movement. Prajamandal movement are the movement basically carried out by, the Praja of the native states, the people's movement against the tyrannical rule of the rulers of the native state and against the British colonial power. This Prajamandal movement before 1942, that is Quit India movement, was not the part of the Indian national movement. Finally, it becomes the part of the Indian national movement in the Quit India movement. So it merged with the Congress movement in the later years of, the Indian national movement in the beginning of 1940s, in 1942 with Quit India movement. So that also played one of the aspect of the Indian national movement. Then Gandhian phase, when Gandhi comes in 1915 from South Africa on 9 January, and he played a very important role. Gandhi played a very important role, and initially, he became the local leader by 3 local satyagrahas and finally become the all India leader through the Rowlatt Act and Rowlatt Satyagrah. And initially Champaran and Kheda and Ahmedabad Satyagrah made him the local leader, and finally Gandhian ideology was followed in non-cooperation movement, civil disobedience movement and Quit India movement. And we see that Gandhi was following the principles of constructive program, non-cooperation, civil disobedience, satyagrah, truth, non-violence, then khadi, all these kind of things, involving women in the national movement, he was a great propagator of Hindu-Muslim unity. He was a person who wanted the movement to become all India in character, pan India in character, and involved the masses. This was a very important, the mobilization of the masses by Gandhi. तो गांधीयन फेज है, दिस इज ऑल्सो वन ऑफ द वेरियस फॉर्म्स. इसमें खास करके एनसीएम, सीडीएम, क्यूआईएम, boycott, Swadeshi, different principles were invoked here, Gandhian principles. Then rise of left and trade union movement, we see one of the aspect. ये कितना नंबर हुआ? 4th, 5th, 6th. देखिए लिखते लिखते आप थक जाएंगे, इतना लिख सकते हैं इसमें, छोटा छोटा सब बता दीजिए. Rise of left after the rise of Russian Revolution and spread of communism in India, providing radical character to the Indian national movement. Trade union movement, being the pressure group, was also, unifying the labors, which was the part of the mass who were playing an important role in the Indian national movement. 2 important masses were very important for Indian national movement. One was peasant and the other was working class. Gandhi was able to, involve these 2 masses, these 2 groups in the Indian national movement, especially the working class and the peasants. The trade union movement, becomes radical, and it was also helping in Indian national movement, though it had the leftist tinge, the communist tinge. Uske baad, women played a very important role, especially before the advent of Gandhi also, but after the coming of Gandhi, women played a very important role. They becomes the part of the mass mobilization. They become the part of mass. They played a significant role in, NCM, non-cooperation movement, civil disobedience movement, Quit India movement. And Gandhi was the person who involved them at a large scale in the Indian national movement. Then the role of Subhash Chandra Bose and INA, after getting frustrated from the politics that was, dirty politics that was developing in the later years of 1930s, and when Subhash Chandra Bose was re-elected as president of Indian National Congress, he was not happy with the politics that was there in Congress, and he left the Congress and he started fighting from outside and against the British imperial power, and the Indian National Army was formed, Azad Hind Fauj. And one more personality was there, that was Rash Bihari Bose. The supremo leader of Indian National Army was Subhash Chandra Bose. So you have to write the role of Subhash Chandra Bose also. Then the Azad Hind government, and then very important was the Imphal campaign and his role, INA trials and other things. So थोड़ा सा ये लिख दीजिए, 8 ये हो गया, 9 ये हो गया, 10th RIN mutiny. This happened in 1946. This was the last nail in the coffin of the British imperial power. It was an extension of, you can say, it was also a non-Congress movement. It was also a non-Congress movement. Swarajist was in reaction to when non-cooperation movement failed. With the failure of the non-cooperation movement, there was rise of Swarajists. Like we see, there was rise of left also. There was a rise of the revolutionary extremism also in 1920s and 30s. जो पहले क्वेश्चन आया, जो मैंने डिस्कस किया. So NCM, the failure of NCM, the fall of NCM, and with the incidents of Chauri Chaura and the dropping of the non-cooperation movement by Gandhi abruptly gave rise to Swarajist. Swaraj Party was within the Congress. They became a separate party within Congress, and they decided that they will not be following Gandhian principles, Gandhian ideology, and they will be the part of the government and will create a pressure within the government by carrying through constitutional means, through democratic methods, by bills and laws. They will create pressure on. That is why, because of the role of Swarajist, Muddiman committee was formed, which was an inquiry committee in Darki, which was the most important aspect of Government of India Act, that is erroneous distribution of the subjects, and the proper provincial autonomy was not provided to the Indians through the Government of India Act 1919. So there was an inquiry on Darki, which was the negative aspect of the Government of India Act. So their role was also very important in fulfilling the void after the fall of NCM. The role of left was also very important because they were inculcating radicalism in the Indian national movement. So ये सब सारे role play कर रहे हैं. Then Royal Indian Navy mutiny. Here also, like it happened in 1857, revolt of 1857, there was a mutiny of the army. That also was a very important. And the another mutiny we see in the Indians who were there in the Navy. They were frustrated by the bad food and unhygienic food and the discrimination that was done on them, and they wanted India's independence, and they started generating pressure on the British imperial power so that they can get the freedom for India. So these are the aspects. ये इतनी चीजें आप लिखेंगे थोड़ा थोड़ा, you will get a wonderful, marks. तो ये question है. Let us take a look of the next question. So in this question, the East India Company had thought that they had found an ideal puppet in Mir Qasim. Mir Qasim, however, believed the expectation of company. So this is basically on a question on Mir Qasim, and it is the part of the Anglo-Bengal struggle. And this we did in the first topic, that is British foundation, expansion and consolidation. See, the Britishers, they fought the Battle of Plassey, and in this, the Robert Clive defeated, Sirajud-Dowlah, and it was done when the people of Sirajud-Dowlah has betrayed Sirajud-Dowlah, and Battle of Plassey was not a great battle, it was a great betrayal. Mir Qasim was the person who was supporting the British, and British considered Mir Jafar, in fact, sorry. Mir Jafar was supporting the British, and he expected that he will become the Nawab, and he became the Nawab, and the Britishers were looking for a puppet so that Mir Jafar could give them lots of leverage, and in return he will be the Nawab of Bengal. But Mir Jafar, after becoming the Nawab, he started gaining authority and he wanted to replace British. And that is why in the Battle of Bedara in 1759, the Mir Jafar was also, removed, because Mir Jafar accompanied with Dutch and tried to defeat British. Later on, Mir Qasim, the son-in-law of Mir Jafar, became the Nawab. So here, British made Mir Qasim, the son-in-law of Mir Jafar, as Nawab, and they believed that he will be an ideal puppet. कठपुतली की तरह यूज करेंगे ताकि उनको खूब फायदा देता रहेगा ये, और मीर कासिम को इसके बदले नवाब बना देंगे. But Mir Qasim, however, belied the expectation of the company, because Mir Qasim initially gave, the benefits to the company, but later he started, thinking of, removing the British. So the personality of Mir Qasim, is to be, understood and is to be explained in this, that, he was an able administrator, and he initially became the puppet, and he was not willing to become the puppet of the British anymore. So he started building his army, he did military reforms, and he started supporting the, the Indian traders. So he was an able administrator, and which is a fact, and is being, recognized almost unanimously by historians. So he has been praised for his uncommon talent of business by observers like, Warren Hastings and Ghulam Hussain. Mir Qasim was a ruler of considerable administrative capacity, and, in many ways improved the position of his province. And Mir Qasim was an ambitious person also at the same time. So he was not willing to become the puppet. And this, when British realized it, they wanted to remove him, because he started supporting and giving favors to Indian traders in place of the British traders. And that is why when Mir Qasim started making an alliance with Shah Alam II and the Nawab of Awadh, that is Shuja-ud-Dawla, then this grand alliance was defeated by the British in the Battle of Buxar in 1764. So Mir Qasim wanted to shake off his dependence on English, and if this desire was unjustified, then of course, Mir Qasim stands condemned. We also see that he was favoring the Indian traders. His activities became critical in the eyes of the Britishers, because Britishers wanted puppet. He wanted that the Britishers wanted that Mir Qasim should provide them lots of privileges continuously, consistently. But the changed behavior of Mir Qasim was not liked. So as a man, Mir Qasim did not possess certain shortcomings, that he was, extremely suspicious, he was overcautious, and at times cruel. That cannot be denied. But, these were the weakness of his age. So that is why there was a historian, and that historian was Dr. Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee, says that he was not willing to be the part of the British Empire, and he was not willing to be a puppet. So he wanted to remove this, a position of puppet. Mir Qasim has been charged of, oppressing the zamindars, and he was not willing to support the British. This is what you have to write. He had to satisfy, the British, which he was not willing. The greed of the British. He had to satisfy the greed and, greed of the company and its servant. And, he had revenue as the only source of money. Therefore, extorted money from zamindars who were in positions to pay him. So, main thing that you have to write is that he was not willing to support the British. ब्रिटिश को सपोर्ट करने के लिए मीर कासिम बिल्कुल भी तैयार नहीं था. मीर कासिम चाहता था कि हम अब पपेट का दर्जा ना रखें, बट दैट इज व्हाई द इंग्लिश the expectations of English were not fulfilled by Mir Qasim, though it was fulfilled in initial times. But later on, Mir Qasim turned against British, and that resulted into Battle of Buxar in 1764 with the defeat of Mir Qasim and the Grand Alliance created by Mir Qasim, and then resulted in the foundation of the British rule. तो मीर कासिम एक्सपेक्टेशन नहीं रख पाया, ये आपको बताना है इस क्वेश्चन में, विच इज अ वेरी वेरी इजी क्वेश्चन एज फार एज मीर कासिम इज कंसर्न. सो यू हैव टू राइट द टेम्परमेंट ऑफ मीर कासिम. क्या किया मीर कासिम ने, ठीक है. तो ये बहुत आसान क्वेश्चन था विच वॉज डन इन एंग्लो बंगाल स्ट्रगल एंड इन बैटल ऑफ बक्सर एंड प्री बैटल ऑफ बक्सर द रोल ऑफ मीर कासिम, which became critical in the eyes of British, and British wanted to remove because he was not ready to act like a puppet. Let's take a look of the next, question. How did English utilitarian thinking impact India in British era? It is a very, very easy question, and that was done in the socio-cultural policies of the British, the policies of the British and British policies we did. We need to understand here that what is utilitarianism. See, the advocates of utilitarian ideology were Bentham, James Mill and J.S. Mill, that is John Stuart Mill. Utilitarianism means, greatest happiness of greatest number of people. And it is the instrument of change. We find this utilitarian ideology from 1813 to 1858, and it has influenced William Bentinck and further, Lord Dalhousie also. So there was focus on legislation of comprehensive social change like Rayotwari system, Bentinck's reforms like, abolition of sati, which was legalized, and in this the effort of Raja Ram Mohan Roy is commendable. The abolition of Sati Act in 1829, then passing of Charter Act of 1833, in which there was the law member was added, and Macaulay was the first law member, and law commission was also constituted. In case of landed property and landed revenue system, supported the cause of settlement with the peasants, and they were anti-zamindars regarding various privileges conferred upon zamindars. So social changes were brought, social reforms were brought, sati was abolished. So the utilitarian thinking believed in unitary government and opposed the federal government and supported the cause of a strong and efficient government which could carry the social changes in India. So Dalhousie was a great representative of utilitarianism, and that is why you see when Dalhousie comes in 1848, he carries out social reforms. He carried out reforms related to education, Wood's Dispatch, for example, the development of railways, then Widow Remarriage Act in 1856, and the development of infrastructure like PWD and communication, transport, postal system, and the telegraph system. All this was making India a modern India. That is why Dalhousie is considered as the father of modern India. So Dalhousie was a great representative of utilitarian thinking and was inspired by utilitarians like John Stuart Mill, James Mill, Bentham, and give examples of Widow Remarriage Act of 1856, Wood's Dispatch, which was the Magna Carta of education system in India, that is mass education, postal system, public works department, etc. So both Bentinck and Dalhousie were great representative of utilitarian ideology, and that has impacted the development in India. Utilitarianism is, a theory that emphasizes the, on maximum happiness of the maximum number of people and remove the sufferings and troubles of the people. So the most influential contribution in this regard was by the utilitarians like Jeremy Bentham, J.S. Mill and John Stuart Mill, and they inspired the Governor General of India, the Governor General of Bengal, William Bentinck, and Governor General of India, Dalhousie. Utilitarianism is considered as, very important, development between 1813 to 1815, and this has caused development in India both in social and economic aspect. तो ये आपको लिखना है कि यूटिलिटेरियनिज्म क्या है और उसका इम्पैक्ट क्या है. What was the reforms carried out in judiciary? What was the reforms carried out in landed property to abolish the problems or remove or solve the problems of India? And as a result of this, a series of laws and penal codes to make India civilized and improved, to carry out social legislations and which could develop India. Utilitarians, also wanted to make India the part of modern progressive world of science and, humanism, and thus, introduce the modern Western science, philosophy and literature. So there is a great impact of utilitarian thinking that was there in India. तो ये सारी चीजें आपको इसमें बता देनी है. Role of the utilitarians and how the utilitarian thinkings resulted into the, development of India. So it is a very easy question that was done when I was teaching you British policies. Take a look of the next question. The same Gandhiji who withdrew the non-cooperation movement on the issue of violence at Chauri Chaura refused to condemn people's violence during Quit India movement. Do you think that he was losing his faith in the efficacy of non-violence and was willing to deviate from the path? Elucidate. See, first of all, in this case, Gandhi's ideology is compared in non-cooperation and Quit India movement. We need to understand that Gandhi of 1920s is different from Gandhi of 1940s. See, in his book, autobiography, The Story of My Experiment with Truth, Gandhi clearly writes about truth and non-violence, which was the most important aspect of Gandhi's life. So, non-cooperation movement was launched according to the principle of non-violence and truth and non-cooperation, which was the mild form of agitation against the British rule. So he gives very clearly that non-violence will be the best, option as far as the other options are, concerned. When non-cooperation movement was launched and when it when violence spread in Chauri Chaura incidents, when 22 cops were burnt alive, the police station was burned in Chauri Chaura in Gorakhpur, Gandhi abruptly dropped the movement. Because it is said that what you preach, you should practice also. It is said that what Gandhi preached non-violence, but in case if it was not practiced, he was not willing to, malign India's position, because he was not willing to waste his time or waste the time of the people in doing violence or these activities which could unnecessarily exhaust the energy of the people. So that is why he dropped the movement. So he was supporting non-violence in the first part of the question that you have to make the examiner understand. Yes, in the second part of the question you will be writing that in 1940s, Quit India movement, when it was launched and it becomes the most violent movement in India's freedom struggle, Gandhi gave the slogan of do or die. That does not mean that Gandhi was advocating violence. You have to defend Gandhi here, that he was not going against his principle of non-violence. He was just generating pressure on the British imperial power, especially in the time of the crisis of the Britain during the Second World War period. So do or die was not violence, it was non-violence. So you have to write कि वो हिंसा को बढ़ावा नहीं दे रहे थे. In fact, वो हिंसा के खिलाफ थे. He was against violence. He was not different from the Gandhi of 1920s, but he was acting like a clever politician. He was acting like a great leader. He was acting like a nationalist, in which Gandhi was giving his idea that non-violence should not be adopted. He was not happy with the violent activities, though Gandhian program during during Quit India movement had some radical principles. In the second part, you defend Gandhi. The do or die slogan of Gandhi was not focusing towards violence. In fact, it was focusing towards non-violence. You always preferred non-violence over violence. तो इसको आप एक्सप्लेन कर सकते हैं दो पार्ट में. गांधी इन 1920s, that is in non-cooperation, why he dropped, and Gandhi in 1940s in Quit India movement, why he was not supporting violence. He was not different from the Gandhi that was in 1920s. तो बहुत आसानी से इसको लिखा जा सकता है दो पार्ट में. Take a look of the next question. While individually Marathas were clever and brave, they lacked the corporate spirit so essential for national independence. Discuss with reasons. इसमें एक पहलू ये पूछ रहा है, मराठा पे क्वेश्चन है ये, कि मराठा को जब इंडिविजुअली हम देखते हैं, when we see Maratha individually, they found to be very clever. They were very, they had the technique of, guerrilla warfare, and they were being supported by the geographical conditions that they had. So they, in one-to-one, they were individually, they were very successful, and especially with the decline of the Mughal Empire, the most important aspirant of the seat of power in India was Maratha. But Marathas were facing problem. What? That there was no unity among Maratha. There was very much internal rift that was there between the Marathas. And we have seen in all the three Anglo-Maratha struggle, when one Maratha fighting against the another Maratha, Nana Fadnavis was a person who was able to maintain this unity among the Marathas. But after the death of Nana Fadnavis in 1800, this unity was not maintained. And we saw when the fight in the first Anglo-Maratha war, the fight between Raghunath Rao and Madhav Rao too, and how Raghunath Rao seeked the help of English. In the second Anglo-Maratha war also we saw that how Peshwa Baji Rao was seeking the help of British against the Holkars. And then Peshwa Baji Rao, he signed subsidiary alliance treaty, that is Treaty of Bessin, which further weakened the Maratha political system and further created disunity among the Marathas. And this disunity gave the English chance to establish or control the Marathas. And this long drawn dream of the English was, becomes a reality when they controlled Marathas. We have seen when Anglo-Mysore War was fought, in first Anglo-Mysore War and second and third. In the third, we see the nexus created by the English, that is Maratha, Nizam and English. And this was against the Tipu and Hyder Ali, and they were against Mysore. So British took the help of Nizam of Hyderabad and Maratha to defeat Mysore. And that is why we see the significance of Treaty of Salbai in 1782. So Maratha, individually they were efficient, they had that war technique, they were brave, they were courageous, but at the same time they were not united. And that is why we see Nana Fadnavis was putting a check on this disunity. But after the death of Machiavelli of Maratha, that is Nana Fadnavis, as per Britishers were able to defeat Marathas very easily. So they do not have, in this sense, they do not have that nationalistic spirit to fight against the British by, making a nexus of the indigenous power. Though Mysore, in which Tipu and Hyder Ali, though they tried to break this nexus and they wanted the help of Maratha and Nizam to fight against this British imperial power. But this unity was for a short period. It was short-lived. And finally, it was successful. This unity of Maratha, Nizam and English was successful against the Mysore. So they were defeated. And in the time of Third Battle of Panipat also, when Abdali attacked, मराठा को कोऑपरेट करने की कोई बात नहीं आई. Nationalistic spirit was, the Marathas were lagging behind in this. This corporate spirit was, they were lagging behind. They could not get the help of the other Maratha. They could not get the help of the indigenous power. But individually they were clever. They were having that courage and valor to fight, and that is why they were the strong and in fact the most strong aspirant of the Indian seat of power after the decline of the Mughal Empire. But when they were defeated in the third battle of Panipat against Abdali, their power was weakened and they were exposed. Their military weaknesses were exposed, and finally they were defeated by the British. So this nationalistic nature was not there. They were fighting for their own geographical areas. They were fighting for themselves. They were against the British in the later years, when they realized after the Treaty of Bessin in 1802 that British has actually divided Marathas properly and took the advantage of this division and occupied their territory. So in the Third Anglo-Maratha War, when they tried to get together, the Marathas, they could not do anything. जब चिड़िया चिग गए खेत तो फिर काहे का पछतावा. तो बाद में जब कोशिशें हुई मराठा की, तो वो हार गए फाइनली एंग्लो मराठा वॉर में. और उससे पहले पानीपत में हार गए. थर्ड बैटल ऑफ पानीपत में इंडिजिनस पावर्स ने सपोर्ट नहीं किया. तो इसीलिए क्वेश्चन आता है कि while individually Marathas were clever and they lagged corporate spirit. Corporate spirit क्या है? ये togetherness, unity, वो नहीं था. And that became essential. Corporate spirit so essential for national independence. वो था नहीं. Otherwise Marathas were very strong. They could have, Maratha and Mysore, they could have ousted British from India. Bengal की बात नहीं करूंगा मैं, though they were rich in resources, but that courage and valor was there with Marathas, but they lacked that corporate spirit. ये आपको इसमें बताना है, दोनों व्यू बताना है. Getting the point? Let us take a look of the next question. Discuss the main constitutional development in India after 1858 and their impact on society. It has twofold answer. One, कि क्या 1858 के बाद हुआ after Government of India Act 1858, that is Indian Council Act 1861, Indian Council Act 1892, Indian Council Act 1909, Government of India Act 1919, that is Montagu-Chelmsford Reform, Government of India Act 1935. इसको बताना है शॉर्ट में, एंड यू शुड फोकस ऑन दीज थ्री एक्ट्स. इस पे फोकस होना चाहिए एंड या इन राइटिंग, बिकॉज इट इज अ वेरी बिग आंसर टू एक्सप्लेन एंड देयर इम्पैक्ट. और इसका क्या, इन तीनों का खास करके क्या इम्पैक्ट हुआ सोसाइटी पे और पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम पे. तो फर्स्ट यू एक्सप्लेन द डेवलपमेंट आफ्टर 1858 एंड देन यू नो द इम्पैक्ट ऑन द सोसाइटी एंड इकोनॉमी ऑफ ऑफ इंडिया. इकोनॉमी और सोसाइटी पे क्या इम्पैक्ट पड़ता है इंडिया के. दिस इज व्हाट यू हैव टू एक्सप्लेन, जो कि बहुत मुश्किल नहीं है कि 1858 के बाद किस तरह से, मतलब यू हैव टू एक्सप्लेन दी सिग्निफिकेंस ऑफ दीज एक्ट, कि क्या सिग्निफिकेंस है, क्या क्या हो गया. सो यू हैव टू मेंशन द प्रोविजन, यू हैव फ्यू प्रोविजन विच वाज एक्चुअली इम्पैक्टिंग, स्पेशली फोकस ऑन द इंडियन काउंसिल एक्ट. इंडियन काउंसिल एक्ट का क्या सबसे बड़ा रोल था इन द सोसाइटी, एंड you have to write both the aspect, positive also and negative also, and you just cannot write only negative. You have to write the positive aspect also, especially when we talk about 1909, the moderates realized that the decision for separate electorate was a measure of the divide and rule of the Indians. So it created communalism in the society, and which created a background for the partition of India in later times. At the same time, they were also providing some kind of provincial autonomy, giving some kind of political power to the Indians, but even that was marked by, flaw. कमियां थी उसमें भी. Provincial, councils were granted, some powers, but they were largely advisory in nature. So in real sense, real autonomy was not there. Reforms, in no way changed the undemocratic and alien nature of the British rule through Indian Council Act of 1909, which is also called as Morlemento reform. So these reforms were not aimed at democratizing or reforming the Indian administration in any way. No economic measures were also being carried out. So the act was passed only to appease the Muslims, the moderates, the landlords, and to create the rift among the different sections of the society. And it was the part and parcel of the British divide and rule policy, especially in the case of 1909. So separate electorate, communal electorate, this caused the problems in the political system in future also. And it becomes the reason for the partition in India and Muslim League politics in 1937 to 47. इसी तरह से गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया एक्ट 1919 को बताइए कि it was not able to provide the provincial autonomy, and the communal electorate that was not only retained but it was further extended, and it was not able to satisfy the Indians. Especially डायरकी का क्या रोल है, डायरकी का क्या इम्पैक्ट है, explain that also. The provision of separate electorate, created a very serious and long-lasting problem for India. Separate electorate was the part of divide and rule policy of the British. Muslims को 1909 में दिया गया, Christian Sikhs वगैरह को 1919 में दे दिया इन्होंने, which was creating problem political aspect में, social aspect में. Various Indian communities raise the demand of separate electorate. एक को मिलेगा, दूसरे भी डिमांड करेंगे, तीसरे भी करेंगे, चौथे भी करेंगे. तो this is what the Britishers were doing. They created the disharmony in the Indian society. This is what you have to write through the Montague claims for reform. Then you write the impact of 1935 also. How this communal electorate was not removed. How further, they created problems in the society. You also write about communal award. Separate electorates were granted to depressed class and it created, serious trouble in India. 1935, separate electorates were granted to women. And in this way, we can see we can say that the cardinal problems were generated by the Morley-Minto reforms. इस तरह से सोसाइटी पे क्या इम्पैक्ट पड़ा है और पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम पे क्या इम्पैक्ट पड़ा है, हाउ इट वाज क्रिएटिंग प्रॉब्लम्स फॉर इंडियंस इन द रिवीजन ऑफ इलेक्टोरल सिस्टम. इसको आप आराम से लिख सकते हैं. इट इज अ वेरी बिग क्वेश्चन टू आंसर कि इसमें क्या क्या चीज़ें आपको बतानी है. तो इसमें इम्पैक्ट बताइए तीनों इन सब एक्ट्स का, और एक्ट को थोड़ा थोड़ा बता दीजिए एंड देन राइट द इम्पैक्ट ऑन दी सोसाइटी एंड इकोनॉमी, सोसाइटी एंड पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम ऑफ द ब्रिटिश इंडिया. 1935 में भी आप आराम से बता सकते हैं कि उससे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल डेवलपमेंट पे क्या फ़ायदा हुआ. Provincial elections were carried out in 1936, but Nehru was not happy with some of the intricate issues that was involved in the Government of India Act 1935. तो ये सारी चीज़ें बताने के बाद तब जाकर के ये आंसर आपका कंप्लीट होता है. Then you write 1935 के मेरिट्स क्या हैं. You also write merits of 1935. You also write demerits of 1935. तब जाकर के आपका आंसर कंप्लीट होगा. What are the limitations of the provincial autonomy in 1935 and 1919? Because see, Darki was there in 1919 and it was transferred to center in from province in 1935 through the Government of India Act 1935. तो ये सारी चीजें लिखने के बाद तब जाकर के आपका ये आंसर कंप्लीट होता है. देन इसके बाद फिर sorry, just a second. A and then B. Discuss the changing nature of Dalit assertion in India in 20th century. Dalit assertion क्या है? Dalit assertion. See, if you try to answer this question, you need to understand, see the term Dalit, which was, coined originally by, Jyotiba Phule, which means broken. And, it indicates that these members are belonging to depressed class. They were the weaker section of the society. And the upliftment of these depressed class or Dalit, remained to be the major concern in the post-independence period. This you have to remember. This you have to write. Then you have to write, that the greatest Dalit leader was B.R. Ambedkar. And how B.R. Ambedkar played an important role through bringing the constitutional reforms and incorporating, the fundamental rights like Article 14, 15, 17 in the Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, and creating the favorable base for the marginalized section, that is Dalit. So in drafting of the Constitution by B.R. Ambedkar, he plays that role, giving representation to the Dalit, giving representation to SC or depressed class. So in legislation and administration under Article 330, 332, 335, so B.R. Ambedkar realized that, the real upliftment of SC is not possible with, the Hindu fold, within the Hindu fold. Therefore, very important for them is to, very important for him to do the constitutional change. And he himself was converted into Buddhism, and he was against the Brahmanical religion. He was against the inequality that was existing in the society. He was the part of the Dalit movement. And you know how the Dalit Panther, the organization, was formed in 1917. You highlight these points also. The organization, Dalit Panther, was a radical Dalit movement in Maharashtra for, the reservation. The demand was reservation of the seats in, which was, much more guaranteed under the provision of the Indian Constitution. That is why, the Congress government at center under Mrs. Indira Gandhi, rejected such radical demands. And even, they adopted the brutal measures against the Dalit Panthers, which was an organization of the Dalit, which were demanding such things. So you have to write these points in the exam. कि कैसे ये सारी चीजें एक मेन मुद्दा बन के चली हैं. How these things were an important aspect. यही तो पूछ रहा है वो. Discuss the changing nature of Dalit assertions in India in 20th century. That is after independence, how they started acting. Then there was the structural adjustment program, SAP, in which Indian economy was opened for foreign investors, and this resulted into the arrival of multinational companies, corporations after the new economic reforms carried out by Dr. Manmohan Singh in 1991. And we find that this development that was done, it was opened the new opportunities of employment. It created a corporate culture, and which was covering the urban centers. So several Dalit youths went for technical and management degrees, and they were employed in emerging corporate sectors. And then you see the development of the Dalit youths also in this context. Okay, so you have to write these points. What was the impact of the new economic policy? How this led to the development? How there was, incorporation of technical education, and which gave good avenues for the Dalits. And this employment opportunities in the government, sector remained to be limited, which could, which could absorb the Dalit youths. But the reforms after 1991 created a good opportunity for Dalit in the corporate field. And you can also write about Dalit capitalism. The Dalit movement in the beginning of 21st century largely, remained to be guided by the Dalit capitalism. So Dalit movement में ये सारी चीजें आपको लिखनी है, and then the answer to this question will be completed. अब let us take a look of the next question. Just hang on. This is the last question of section A, that is modern India का जो section है basically. How were the princely states integrated in Indian Union after the partition? What was the role of Sardar Patel? It has two aspects. That the process of integration that you have to mention, integration of native states. And the second thing that you will be writing is the role of Sardar Patel. ये दो चीज इसमें बताना है. तो इसको शुरू करेंगे that what were the important issues of integration, की existence of 562 big and small native states at the time of independence, and the native states were not the part of British India, but they existed as the subordinate unit, political units under the British paramountcy. And under the partition plan, they were given three options, that they should be the part of India, to be the part of Pakistan, or remain independence. The native state to become the part of Pakistan and remain free was a problem for Indians. So the problems, what are the, पहले आप बताइए कि what were the problems in integrating these native states? One problem was that the geographical, contiguity, the geographical aspects, the geography of the native states, and they were geographically, scattered. They were scattered, they were sporadic, and there was divergent approaches of the rulers that you have to write, and the divergent approaches of the rulers, in the sense that rulers sometime be the part of Pakistan or sometime be the part of India, or some of the rulers, they wanted to be independent. The clash of, the clash between the approaches of the rulers and the opinions of the people of that particular native state was also a very important problem in the integration of the native states, especially the case of Junagadh. Junagadh case is a classic example in this context. So there was, there was also, the another problem was that there was no proper effective forum through which, these things could be carried out. These problems, these could be carried out through the negotiations. तो ये सारी प्रॉब्लम्स बहुत मेजर इमर्ज करके आ रही थी, इसीलिए the move towards integration was done. And for this, separate department was created, which was known as Indian States Department in June 1947 for negotiating with the rulers for accession. So Patel was given the responsibility, and VP Menon. Patel was the president of the department of the Indian State Department, and VP Menon was the secretary. And Menon had, already put forward a plan of accession in May 1946. And this plan was accession on the basis of the surrender of the three subjects, that is defense, external affairs, and communication. So this plan was, adopted and considered as valid, which was necessary for the accession. So he created two important things: standstill agreement and the instrument of accession. Standstill agreement was a temporary arrangement. Instrument of accession, any native state signing the instrument of accession will become the part of Pakistan, India. पाकिस्तान का पार्ट बन जाए या इंडिया का पार्ट बन जाए. So all these things that was being carried out. Then Patel also called the meeting of the native states, and he urged the native rulers to take quick, take the decision and to join the right union. And Patel played a very important role. Patel ka role likhna hai. Patel, he carried out the negotiations on practical lines. Patel, he was the person, when he tried to convince the rulers of the native state in the meeting that was being called. And in this, Patel said that they will not be surrendering the things that they were getting during the time of British, except defense, defense and external affairs and other things, communication, that they will not be getting. वरना वो तोप की सलामी वलामी वो जो ले रहे हैं सारी चीजें वो अपना मेंटेन करें. Patel, presented the views to protect their rights and privileges. And Patel also said that there will be no interference in the matters of the privileges of the princely states, and they can retain that privy purse. So Patel gave them the wide assurance in regard to their future status. Patel, made nationalistic appeal to the rulers to join India. So Patel played a very important role in integrating native states. That is why he was considered as Bismarck of modern India, where he used the policy of blood and iron, carrot and stick in order to integrate the native states of India and change the political map of India. So he presented the view that it was very important for the development of the people of India that the rulers should join the native, India. तो पटेल का एक बहुत जबरदस्त रोल था, and the efforts of Patel and Menon, resulted in that most of the countries joined, India, and few joined Pakistan, and Kashmir, Junagadh, and Hyderabad were problematic. So discuss about Kashmir, discuss about Junagadh, Hyderabad को कैसे जो है people's movement was there. Then Operation Polo in case of Hyderabad. Junagadh also, we see that the Junagadh shows the positive response to the accession to the ruler of Junagadh, showed the positive response to the accession to Pakistan, but the people of Junagadh were not willing to go to Pakistan. So there was a people's movement, and there was a holding of referendum, and that was in the favor of India. Hyderabad also, the largest native state, and Hyderabad issue was, a very important issue in which, the Nizam stand was very wavering or vacillating, and there was signing of the standstill agreement, and Nizam's political intention was not very clear, but the people of Hyderabad was standing in the favor of joining India at any cost. So Operation Polo was launched against the Ittihadul Muslimin, which was a military Muslim organization having the official support of Razakars, which were the paramilitary wing that was launched, एंटी पीपल कैंपेन, बिकॉज जो लोग हैदराबाद से थे वो इंडिया को ज्वाइन करना चाहते थे, और जो ये इत्तेहादुल मुस्लिमीन एंड दी which was a paramilitary wing, and Razakars which were the paramilitary wing of Ittihadul Muslimin, they carried out anti-people campaign. Then Patel plays a very important role here by carrying the Operation Polo under Major General J.N. Chaudhary, and finally the accession took place in the presence of the Indian forces. And then Kashmir case is very popular. You know that how the National Conference under Sheikh Abdullah had shown the positive response to accession to India, and then how the invasion of Kashmir by the militia forces supported by Pakistan, how Pakistan interfered in this. Ruler of Kashmir, Hari Singh, Maharaja Hari Singh, appealed to Indian help, but Patel said that first accession, sign the instrument of accession, then help will be provided. So he signed, and finally the help was provided. And in this case, the accession was done. But further there was problem created by Pakistan, and what all happened in the couple of years back, the abolition of the Article 370, and Jammu and Kashmir became given the status of union territory, and it was and it is the integral part of India. So this is what you have to write, and you have to write the role of Patel, कि पटेल का कितना बड़ा रोल है, पटेल ने क्या किया, पटेल का रोल बताइए इसमें, ठीक है, किस तरह से पटेल ने चीज़ों को इम्प्रूव किया. This is what you have to explain. When you explain these things, it will be a very good answer then. And then explain how he was Bismarck of modern India. Like Bismarck integrated the divided Germany by the policy of blood and iron, Patel also used the political strategy and blood and iron, carrot and stick, and integrated India. So what we see, you see, the map of India is because of the efforts made by सरदार वल्लभ भाई पटेल. तो इसका रूल आपको बताना है ना, प्रोसेस बताना है, उसके बाद ये आंसर आपका कंप्लीट हो जाता है. इसमें कुछ है नहीं कि और एक्स्ट्रा क्या लिखना है. प्रोसेस और रोल ऑफ पटेल, दिस इज द थिंग दैट यू हैव टू राइट इन दिस पर्टिकुलर क्वेश्चन. और इतना करने के बाद ये सारा का सारा आंसर आपका कंप्लीट हो जाता है. सो दिस इज व्हाट इज द क्वेश्चन दैट वाज रिलेटेड टू सेक्शन ए. सेक्शन ए हम लोग कंप्लीट करते हैं. उसका सेक्शन बी. सेक्शन बी इज मेनली फ्रॉम वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री. द क्वेश्चन इज क्रिटिकली एग्जामिन द फॉलोइंग statement in about 150 words. The first question is, there were many reasons why industrial revolution first happened in England. Very easy question, several times in optional, and in optional as well as in the GS they have asked several times. UPSC is in love with such kind of question. They keep on giving these easy question. It was done in the notes also, it was very well explained. So here you have to write basically the factors of the industrial revolution. Why industrial revolution happened in England only? England में ही क्यों हुआ? That means you have to explain that what all were the factors that resulted into the the industrial revolution. See, you have to write that there were reasons that England was far ahead of other countries of Europe. It was an island nation, and congenial atmosphere was there in England. And after Renaissance and Reformation, Englishmen began to enjoy that freedom of thought and expression, and because of this they have that atmosphere of free thinking, critical thinking, scientific outlook, spirit of freedom. All this was creating a sense of thinking new ideas. So large number of inventions made by the British scientists in England. Inventions, especially in the case of machines, and its use in the manufacturing was a starting point of industrial revolution in the second half of 18th century in England. And the example you can give, that is John Key, who was a weaver of Lancashire. He invented flying shuttle, and which increased the speed of weaving. Give some example of James Hargreaves. Give example of Richard Arkwright, who invented water frame. All these things you will be writing in the first factor. इसको हम लोग इसे मान लेते हैं congenial atmosphere. In England, ये बहुत प्राइम रीजन, बहुत प्राइम. बाकी जगह the church was so much dominant. Church was dominant like anything. So there was no free thinking. There was control of church. But in England, where Puritan religion, the Protestant religion was dominant, in which there is free thinking, and this has paved the way for the industrial revolution. Then second factor was availability of capital. Availability of capital. See, in England there was vast amount of capital accumulation that was done, and this capital was accumulated out of the profit of her growing trade that enabled her to make large outlays on machinery. पैसा था तो पैसा लगाया उन्होंने, ट्रेड से पैसा आ रहा है, उस पैसे को लगा दिया कहाँ जा करके, इंडस्ट्रीज में. तो इतना पैसा बाकी जगह नहीं था जितना ब्रिटेन में था. In Britain, commercial revolution happened, development of trade and commerce, marine trade, Then, availability of labor. This also becomes a reason. Availability of labor. This also becomes a reason. And, there was the breaking of the feudal system and, agriculture revolution that happened in the 16th century in England. And, this resulted into the large number of peasants and who were, shifted to the cities. And finally, the laborers were easily available in England to be employed in the factories. Then, Britain had large colonial empire. ये भी एक reason. Colonial empire. इतना बड़ा colonial empire है that the colony, Britain had colony in several parts of the world. And those colonies were the cheap provider of the raw material, and the colonies were also acting as a market for the goods prepared from the manufactured from the machine. Then, there was availability of coal, availability of coal and, iron mines. ठीक, एक साथ आसपास भी located close to each other. ये भी एक फायदा हो रहा था. This has encouraged English to evolve the new technique of manufacturing of the iron and utilization of coal. And because of the availability of coal and iron ore in large quantity, greatly helped the growth of numerous industries in England. तो ये एक फायदा था. अवेलेबिलिटी ऑफ नेचुरल रिसोर्स एक फायदा था. एग्रीकल्चर रेवोल्यूशन जो ब्रिटेन में हुआ, दैट वाज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फैक्टर. ब्रिटेन हैड far better means of transport than rest of the world. They were number one in navy. They have the best navy in the world, which was helping in the marine trade. And you know how trade transport helps in carrying out the industrialization process. It helps in mobility. So roads were constructed, construction of canals, all these things that you have to mention. Then there was practical bent of mind of the British people. Practical bent of mind. And this practical bent of mind of the British, it contributed in England's lead in technical revolution. Through scientists, through engineers who had a very practical bent of mind. So this was also helping the English where industrial revolution happened. Politico-administrative factors were also responsible where the politico-administrative system of Britain was very liberal, very progressive, and the citizens has free thinking. The citizens were happy, were satisfied. The government policy was helping the entrepreneurs to carry out the industrial project. Glorious revolution of 1688 had resulted into large number of progressive reforms in the British political system. ये सारी चीजें important role play कर रही. Social stability है, geographical location अलग है. जो यूरोप में लड़ाइयां चल रही हैं, ब्रिटेन is away from the rest of the Europe, and being an island country, it enjoys its geographical position, and there was no turmoil, bloodshed, revolution like it was happening in the case of other European countries. It was free from all these hassles. Religious factors have Protestant nation. Britain is considered as Protestant nation, and the Protestant religion was followed there, which emphasized, Protestant religion emphasized on education, accumulation of wealth, capital, hard work, and freedom of thought. तो ये सारी चीजें हेल्प कर रही हैं ब्रिटेन को to become the country where for the first time industrial revolution happened. ये सारी चीजें बहुत लिख सकते हैं. You can write for hours together only on this. साइंटिफिक रेवोल्यूशन वहीं हुआ, टेक्नोलॉजिकल रेवोल्यूशन वहीं हुआ, कमर्शियल रेवोल्यूशन वहीं हुआ, एग्रीकल्चर रेवोल्यूशन वहीं हुआ, इंटेलेक्चुअल रेवोल्यूशन वहीं हुआ, enlightenment took place there. So everything was supporting England, where industrial revolution happened for the first time in the world. ये सारी चीजें लिखनी पड़ेंगी, तब जाके मिलेगा मार्क्स. So this is done. तो सीधा था ये इंडस्ट्रियल रिवोल्यूशन हम लोगों ने किया था वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री में, which is a very easy topic. Second, Napoleon's continental system may be reckoned as the greatest blunder and may be described as monument of misdirected energy. ये सीधा rise and fall of Napoleon से, rise and fall of Napoleon. और इसमें basically the decline of Napoleon, one of the factor for decline of Napoleon was continental system. This is what you have to explain in this. So you have to explain what is continental system and how continental system was, how it backfired Napoleon and it becomes a reason for the fall of Napoleon. So basically you have to write the drawbacks of the continental system that was introduced by Napoleon in 1806 to bring Britain on her knees. घुटनों पे लाना चाहता था ब्रिटेन को. So in this question, continental system you have to write. First introduce continental system. You write about continental system, that continental system was introduced in 1806 by Napoleon to bring Britain on her knees, and it has to and the other objective was to establish the Napoleonic dominance. And this system that was introduced in 1806, it continued till 1812. Then you write the factors for the continental system, that how Napoleon was aiming to become the most powerful person, and he already became, but the most important stumbling block for Napoleon was Britain. And Napoleon knew the success of Britain was there because of the trade and commerce, because Britain को बनियाओं का देश कहा गया है, and Britain was the country of traders and merchants, and Napoleon thought that it is very important to break their trade. So according to Napoleon, Britain was a country of traders and merchants, and her strength lied in trade and commerce. That is why the excessive trade link of Britain with different countries was one of the reason for Britain becoming powerful. So he wanted to create an economic blockade of Britain. We have to write about it, that Napoleon implemented the economic blockade of Britain with the rest of the Europe. Then you write about the nature of the the continental system, that it was an economic weapon against Britain. Napoleon was of the opinion that Britain was the country which could be only stopped if we break their economic system, especially trade. That is why he has incorporated the continental system. After this, you write how it failed. See, with the implementation of the continental system, French industries could not fulfill the vacuum created by prohibition of the British goods to the common masses, because British ki jo goods the, they were very qualitative, and they were very popular in different parts of Europe. And since there was a continental blockade of Britain with the rest of the Europe, the people were also not receiving, and Britain cannot watch this as a silent spectator. So Britain also started acting against Napoleon's continental system. Hence, continental system backfired Napoleon. Continental system was a blunder done by Napoleon and became one of the reasons for the decline of Napoleon. Continental system was implemented because Britain remained unconquered by Napoleon. And why? Because British Navy was very powerful and Britain was the most powerful imperial power. That is why we see that Napoleon, the British Navy defeated the French Navy very badly in the Battle of Trafalgar in 1806. Therefore, he planned a different strategy. That is why Napoleon planned a different strategy, that was Continental System. Continental System proved a very important failure of Napoleon and it was fatal for Napoleon. उसके खिलाफ ही ये कदम जो है नेपोलियन का उठ गया. That was Continental System. So this tool of Napoleon failed. Napoleon का ये जो पूरा का पूरा था वो उसके खिलाफ हो गया, because the people were also went against the imperial exercise of Napoleon, especially the forceful implementation of Continental System in the different parts of Europe, which was against Britain. So Britain also started making alliance with the different countries of Europe, and this anti-Napoleonic coalition was created, and that this has broke the back of Napoleon. तो इसमें आप लिखेंगे कि कितना बड़ा ब्लंडर था and how it created a misdirected as a monument of misdirected energy. So it failed. Basically, you have to write the failure of the Continental System by writing the nature and the failure of the Continental System. दो चीज इसमें बताइए, nature क्या है और failure क्यों हुआ. Very easy question. Then Chartist movement. There was a separate topic done by me in the class, that was Chartist movement, that was in 1832 to 1859. The question says, the Chartist movement failed to achieve its stated objective, but it succeeded in seeding the idea that a representative democracy should include all citizens. तो दोनों एस्पेक्ट लिखना है, फेलियर भी लिखना है और अचीवमेंट भी लिखना है. Then you will be, how you will write the introduce Chartist movement, and then you write the failure and write achievement also to an extent. See, if you try to understand, Chartist movement was organized by the representative of laborers because of the the reform of 1832 had failed to satisfy their aspirations, and the laborers laborers did not get any representation in 1832. So therefore, in order to incorporate the political provision for the labor, to give them some kind of political power, that is why Chartist movement was Chartist movement started. And by this time there was the influence of socialist ideology that was clearly seen in among the laborers basically, and their demands were expressed in the Chartist movement in 1838. So the chief objective of Chartist movement was to make the working class politically powerful, and that is why, because the reforms that was done in 1832 could not give the voting right to the workers. It could not improve the condition of the laborers and the lowest class of the society. That is why this Chartist movement was started. So they had the demands in the Chartist movement that voting right should be given to them, parliamentary elections should be held every year, then members of the parliament should get some allowance, and the country should be divided into equal electoral districts. But it failed. Second aspect that you will be writing, that it failed. After introducing Chartist movement, write the failure also. That, agitators, adopted some, false tactics. And, they used the fictitious signatures, on some kind of monster petition which was discredited them, which has, discredited them. Chartist movement, remained only political propaganda. It was not popular and it lost the sympathy of English people. Chartist movement, lagged good leaders, good organizational behavior, and, it could not show the correct path to the liberals. तो उसमें फेलियर बताइए कि किस तरह से चार्टिस्ट मूवमेंट फेल कर गया. Leaders, were not efficient and capable. They were not, powerful orators, and they failed to explain the aims and objective of the movement to the mass. So mass support, the movement lagged behind the mass support. And, they have misunderstood the nature of, dissatisfaction prevailing in Britain, especially in the working class. So this popular dissatisfaction was very much in the Chartist movement, and it raised the demand for political reforms. तो एक तरीके से fail कर गया. The leaders of, Chartist movement used immoral methods. They collected, large number of signatures in support of their demands. But when, when an inquiry was conducted, signs were found forged. This adversely affected, the moral base of Chartist movement, and therefore the movement was suppressed by the government. But significance was also there. Achievement तो था ही ना, ऐसा नहीं था कि achievement नहीं था, because it was a movement for labor. It was popularizing the demands of labor. It was, highlighting the plight of the labor, problems of the labor. It strengthened the labor solidarity. It provided a ground for future labor reforms. ये सब पॉइंट्स आपको बताने हैं. तो फेलियर और अचीवमेंट दोनों आपको इसमें एक्सप्लेन करना है, which is a very direct and easy question which was done in the class. So Chartist movement was a British democratic politics एक टॉपिक है, उसमें कराया था मैंने Chartist movement, which is a very easy question, direct and easy. Take a look of the next question. During Cold War, some important leaders of non-alignment movement wanted to keep the movement away from military blocs. Here, the rise of non-alignment movement, rise and development of non-alignment movement. See, the non-alignment movement developed after the Second World War. There was rise of the third world countries after the division of the world after Second World War into the capitalist world, that is US. The leader was US, and the second world was the communist world. The leader was USSR. And the third world, that is the developing countries which got independence from the imperial powers, and they formed the third world. And they, in order to raise the voice of the third world countries and protect their independence and not to get indulged into the Cold War politics, NAM was created, and India was one of the founding fathers of NAM. So there were the African and Asian and Afro-Asian conferences from 1947 to 1961, especially the Belgrade Conference, which resulted in the foundation of the NAM. But there were problems in NAM. NAM failed as an organization. NAM का failure हो गया. And why it failed, this is a very important thing, that how NAM failed as an organization, especially after the Cold War politics, we find the failure of NAM. So इसलिए इसमें पूछ रहा है, some important leaders of NAM wanted to keep movement away from military blocs. What were the important military blocs? Capitalist bloc and Western capitalist country, the leader was US, and the communist blocs. So NAM was an NAM. See, you need to explain the nature of NAM. That it was non-isolationist, non-indifferent. It was playing the role of, protecting the independence of the newly born nation, which got freed from the imperial powers. तो ये सब आपको explain करना है, which is very easy question. You have to defend NAM and try to write some of the relevance also, if possible. आपने ये लिखा होगा तो ये बहुत easy question है. ये हम लोग कोल्ड वॉर में करते हैं. कोल्ड वॉर इज अ टॉपिक. इसमें मैंने डिटेल में NAM वगैरह कराया है. थर्ड वर्ल्ड NAM, all these kind of things. Then the next question, the Arab countries looked upon Nasser as leader who could withstand the pressure exerted by Western countries on Egypt to make peace with Israel. See, this question comes from Arab world, Egypt, especially the role of, Egypt. See, Egypt enjoys a long and, glorious history since very ancient time. And, till 1840, Egypt was the part of the Holy Roman Empire, and it was, captured by Arabs in this year. And, later on we see that how Nasser of Egypt was providing the leadership of the Arab world. So here you have to write the role of Nasser. The role of Nasser, who comes from, Egypt, and how he plays an important role in the Arab world, especially against Israel, because there was an Arab-Israel conflict. You have to also write how Nasser, Jamal Abdul Nasser, played an important role in Suez Canal crisis that has happened, and how it was, favoring in the emergence of the Arab nationalism. किस तरह से नासिर ने ये सारी चीजें की थी. नासिर played a very significant role in this. तो इसमें आपको जो है, you write about the Egypt, and then you write Nasir, the role of Nasir, how he was able to, withstand the pressure exerted by the Western countries on Egypt to make peace with Israel. So especially in context to Egypt, you have to write this, question, which is not again a difficult. This year I'm telling you, the question that was asked by UPSC was not a difficult question. These questions were very direct and very easy question, especially, in the Cold War politics. And further also you will see that how this is, being asked. This question belong to the Cold War, and these are very direct questions. The role of Nasir बताइए, how he was playing a dominant role in the Arab world and against the Israel, how he was able to withstand the pressure. तो बहुत ही, how the pan-Arab, unity was important agenda for Arabs, and to fight against the Israel. So it is in the light of Arab-Israel conflict, and in which, emergence of the movement of in Egypt and the role played by Nasser government, how Nasser government was, acting against, how it was acting against the, the Israel, and the pressure generated by the Western capitalist powers, Western powers basically. See, when, there was the beginning of the Second World War, in 1939, that resulted, the complete British domination over Egypt. And how, once again, it was strengthened the the Egypt national movement, and how Egypt became free from the clutches of the imperial power, the British imperial power, and how Jamal Abdul Nasser organized, organized a revolution, and captured the power. Okay, so he asked Britain and France to withdraw their forces from Egypt land, and they demand how Nasser demands were not fulfilled, and what were the steps taken by Nasser. So all this we need to explain in this. Okay, so let us take a look of the next question. What was enlightened about the age of enlightenment? So it is again a very easy question, because it is directly from enlightenment ideas. Enlightenment ideas से ये question है, और इसमें directly पूछे हुआ है कि क्या enlightened है enlightenment में. And I covered this from the topic the enlightenment ideas. So it is a very direct question that was asked in the exam. इसमें क्या enlightenment है, और what is enlightened in the enlightenment ideas. See, the term enlightenment refers to the cultural movement witnessed in Europe during 17th and 18th century. Enlightenment it symbolizes the new ideas, new thinking and new knowledge. And the term enlightenment was used for the first time by the German philosopher Immanuel Kant in his pamphlet What is Enlightenment? So enlightenment is basically the result of Renaissance that has happened in 15th century. Enlightenment is a phenomena of 17th and 18th century. The ideas of enlightenment spread to the different parts of Europe, and enlightenment is a revolution in the thought process. It promoted scientific thought, it promoted intellectual interchange. So for Kant enlightenment was the mankind's final coming of the age and the emancipation of human consciousness from an immature state of ignorance. So this is what the enlightenment is. Enlightenment ideas resulted into the American and French Revolution. The enlightenment is considered as the last phase of Renaissance. Enlightenment developed as an extension of scientific revolution. It has the element of the free thinking. It has the element of scientific outlook. It has the element of spirit of freedom. It has the element of humanism. It has the element of the liberal political system that developed in Europe. इसी को तो enlightenment कहा जा रहा है. So what you have to write here, the nature of enlightenment, how it developed in Europe. The core idea was represented by reason and rational ideas. Rationality क्या है, reasons क्या है. These ideas, enlightenment ideas, neglected and rejected the medieval ideals, and it focused on the weakness of the government, social disparities, and the demerits of church. Ideas of enlightenment is found an expression in the reforms of economy that was presented by Adam Smith, and that idea was the reform of law. Reform of economy by Adam Smith, and the reform in law was by Jeremy Bentham, and the reform in ethics by Immanuel Kant, reform in religion by Voltaire. All this were the part and parcel of the enlightenment ideas. So ideas of enlightenment was characterized by belief in supremacy of nature. It was characterized in the belief of supremacy of nature. It has the element of liberalism. It has the element of logic and reason. It has the the element of empiricism. Empiricism का एक बहुत बड़ा element है enlightenment में. So all this thing that you have to explain. It has the element of humanism. Empiricism क्या है? That it believes in, accepting only those ideas and practices which can be seen practically. It emphasizes on, accepting only those things which can be touched and seen. This is what is the element of the Enlightenment ideas. Egalitarianism, equality, constitutionalism, democratic vision, individualism, these are wisdom, tolerance, scientific outlook, spirit of freedom. These are the important, characteristics of Enlightenment ideas. ये आपको इसमें बताना है, तब जाकर के आपका आंसर जो है ये कंप्लीट होता है. तो व्हाट इज एनलाइटेंड ये पूछ रहा है, ये सब बता दीजिए. ये सब पॉइंट्स बहुत इजी है. वी डिड दिस इन द फर्स्ट टॉपिक. पहला टॉपिक में यही करता हूं, दैट इज रिनीसा रिफॉर्मेशन एंड एनलाइटनमेंट आइडियाज. लेट अस टेक अ लुक ऑफ द नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन. What were the causes and consequences of the revolutionary upsurge of 1840s in Europe? Basically, this question is pointing towards the European revolution that was in Europe in 19th century. 19th century revolution, basically, that is the continuation of the French Revolution. So basically you have to write, इसमें क्या लिखना है आपको, revolution of 1848, which is the part of the European Revolution of 19th century, and this is an extension of the French Revolution that has happened in 1789. But there was, after the French Revolution, there was rise and fall of Napoleon, and Napoleon, destroyed the ideals of the French Revolution. There was formation of, Vienna Congress, in which, the Metternich system was formed, and this was, Metternich was a person who was very conservative and he wanted to bring Europe back to pre-revolutionary era. But the French Revolution of 1789 was not completed. So there was again the revolution that has happened in 1730, and which was an extension of the French Revolution 1789. And again there was a revolution of 1748, which completely, broke the revolution, the Metternich system, basically. So revolution of 1848 was inspired by the principles of liberalism, mainly mainly you can say the principle of liberalism. The revolutions were against the prevailing monarchical orders, and they were, demanding for extension of, the natural rights and other freedoms. So revolution of 1848, 1840s की बात कर रहा है. That means it is indicating towards the revolution of 1848, which is the part of European Revolution in 19th century and is an extension of the French Revolution of 1789, which was clearly done in the class notes. So revolution of 1848 was inspired by the ideals of representations. It was inspired by the ideals of people's sovereignty. It was, this was, the final, you can say, the culmination of the revolution of 1789. So revolution of 1848 was inspired by the ideas of socialism as well, and it was against the dominance of bourgeoisie class, that is the middle class, which gained prominence after the French Revolution of 1789. So all these points that you must write. The revolution of 1848 was political and economic in character, and the revolutions were, dissatisfied by the existing, politico-economic order which was dominated by bourgeoisie class. इसीलिए ये revolution of 1848 हुआ. Revolution of 1848, enjoys the place of great significance in French and European history. And it resulted in the complete end of the Metternich system, and it paved the way for a rise of nationalistic consciousness, and finally resulted into unification of Germany, Italy and Germany. So revolution of 1848 strengthened the nationalistic forces, which played a very important role in the rise of, क्या कहते हैं, Germany as an unified state, nation state, and Italy as a nation state. तो इसमें ये सारी चीज आप नोट कर सकते हैं, लिख सकते हैं, इम्पैक्ट बता सकते हैं. Then the next question is, the white minority government of South Africa treated the natives very badly by denying them fundamental rights and made apartheid as an official policy. How were the people able to end apartheid policy and establish a transitional rule? So it is the question directly from apartheid. You see, apartheid refers to, the policy of racial segregation. And, this policy was implemented by South African government, around the middle of 20th century. And in accordance with this policy, complete racial segregation was implemented in whole South Africa. So here you have to write about apartheid and the elements of the policy of apartheid, basically how it was developing and how there were reaction against the indigenous reaction and the external reactions that was being carried out. इसीलिए पूछ रहा है, the white minority government of South Africa treated the natives very badly. Racial segregation was done by denying them fundamental rights. ये सब इतना बड़ा क्वेश्चन बनाया गया आपको परेशान करने के लिए. And made apartheid as official policy. So you have to write about apartheid के बारे में बताइए. Write about few things about the factors and how were the people able to end apartheid policy and establish a transitional rule. So how there were internal reaction especially and external reaction against apartheid. This is how you have to mention in the answer. तो इन ये सब points आप बता दीजिए. Mandela, role of Nelson Mandela, and the role played by the government, the people there, the role played by the leaders there, and the especially the role played by Nelson Mandela. So the policy of apartheid, was a very, you can say, the dark phase of the South Africa. That is why there were reactions against the policy of apartheid. And here you will be writing that, how there was a reaction within South Africa and how there was reaction outside South Africa. So, but you have to focus on how this was, playing an important role. What was the role of United Nations? What was the role of international, people, international organization, and how this came to an end. ये भी कराया गया था आपको. And especially the policy of apartheid came to end during the time after 1989 when the E.W.D. Clark came into power, and it was decided that end of apartheid should be done completely, and the apartheid laws should be repealed, and release of Nelson Mandela in 1990. And in 1991, the talks began with the representative of the blacks about the framing of the new constitution, and talks were completed successfully in 1993. With this, policy of apartheid came to an end. So you have to write the reactions, basically how this has happened effectively इन द केस ऑफ अपार्थीड के बारे में बताइए, थोड़ा सा फैक्टर्स बताइए, एंड हाउ इट केम टू एन एंड, हाउ इट केम टू एन एंड, राइट द रोल ऑफ ANC ऑल्सो देयर। तो ये सारी चीजें आपको इसमें लिखना है, एंड देन आई एम श्योर यू विल बी इन अ पोजिशन टू गेट fetch marks from this question. Let us take a look of the next question. Rise of nationalism across nations shattered the chains which held together the empires of modern Europe. See, the rise of nationalism in the 19th century is a very important phenomena, and nationalism emanated from French Revolution. See, French Revolution popularized the principles of liberty, equality and fraternity. It gave birth to the idea of nationalism. And Napoleon, Napoleon conquered, when Napoleon conquered the large part of Europe, he popularized the revolutionary principles in the areas which was conquered by him, and people began to question the old monarchical system, and they demanded for self-rule. But after the defeat of Napoleon, and finally the establishment of Vienna Congress and Metternich system, again there was re-establishment of the monarchical system. See, basically the Congress, the Vienna Congress, they redrew the map of Europe. The pre-revolutionary position of Europe was restored according to Metternich system. And all the changes made by Napoleon was set aside. The old rulers, once again they came to throne, and Italy was redivided, Germany was redivided, Austria was given control over North Italy, and Persia was made larger and stronger. So again, there was the movement that emerged, and क्योंकि आग लग चुकी थी और वो आग अब बुझ नहीं सकती थी, बिकॉज फ्रेंच रिवॉल्यूशन के आइडियल्स को नेपोलियन फैला चुका था जहां जहां वो जो है रूल कायम कर चुका था अपना. सो नेपोलियन वेर एवर ही went and conquered those areas, he spread the ideals of nationalism. And the nationalism played a very important role which emanated from French Revolution. Nationalism means feelings of oneness, pride, patriotism towards one's homeland. That is that was the most important phenomena of the 19th century. So there were factors for the rise of nationalism. There were factors for the rise of nation states. In 19th century, there were new nation states, they were formed in Europe. Like, France. In France, the Great French Revolution that happened in 1789 paved the way for France to become the modern nation state. And, French had to fight a long battle for the freedom. After the death of Napoleon, the younger brother of the king, Louis, 16, was made the king. And this was decided by Vienna Congress. Vienna Congress happened in the 1815, and they wanted to, destroy all the activities of Napoleon and to bring back Europe to pre-revolutionary era, that is before 1789. So Louis 17 and Charles 10 ruled France. But the revolution of 1830, the Charles 10 was forced to hand over the power to his grandson, Louis Philippe. And he introduced many reforms, and that ensured the individual liberty. And France, got independence in 1863. Austria also same thing. That was being carried out. The people in Austria, revolted against the autocratic rule of King Ferdinand, and his Chancellor Metternich in 1848, but failed. And then you see the revolt made by Louis, Napoleon, who was the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, who became the next ruler of Austria. So all these changes were being carried out only because of the spirit of nationalism that was growing in 19th century. Especially we see the spirit of nationalism that grew in the second half of the 19th century, which resulted in the unification of Germany and Italy. In Spain also we see that there was the Bourbon dynasty, which was restored by Vienna Congress, but we find that the soldiers of the Spanish army revolted against the king in 1820, and the king was forced to establish a liberal government based on constitution, that is liberal constitutional government. Belgium also there were changes done, so Belgium में भी काफी सारी चीजें develop हो रही थी. तो you have to write that rise of nationalism across the nation in Europe shattered the chains which held together the empires. जो monarchical system है, जो empire है, वो बिल्कुल ध्वस्त हो गया nationalism की लहर से. The wave of nationalism destroyed the empire system, the absolute monarchical system, and almost every European nation witnessed nationalistic movement after the Vienna Congress, and the main aim was to unite the divided nation. And this found an expression in the revolution of 1830 and 1848. In 1830 we see that the revolution started in France, Italy, Germany, in Belgium, in Poland, in Greece, and in other parts of the countries. And the European Revolution of 1830, which was carrying the element of nationalism, people of these countries, tried to free themselves from autocratic rulers. This is what is the shattering the chains which held together the empires of the modern Europe. Revolution of 1848 was also a very important revolution, and this also brought the nationalism into limelight and finally becomes a reason for unification of Italy and Germany. तो ये सारी चीजें इसमें लिखेंगे, and that was done in European Revolution when I taught you 19th century European Revolution. Let us take a look of the next question. In American Civil War, the victory of North had many consequences. Some of them were direct and obvious. However, the indirect effects of American development were perhaps even more important. This is related to American Civil War, and this was also done when in the class American Civil War, and that happened between 1861 to 1865. And American Civil War is a very important phenomena, and it is said that it was the second American Revolution. See, in 1865 the war ended, and finally a Confederate army was defeated after 4 years long fight. And there was in 1863 the Battle of Gettysburg, which was a turning point, which was in favor of the northern part of America. And this ended in the Civil War, which was in favor of North. And there was impact of Civil War. This is what you have to mention here, and the role of mainly the impact of the Civil War, what all changes that was being brought. The Andrew Johnson became the new president after Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, and he embarked upon the policy of Reconstruction. And here in this question you have to write that what were the important impacts that was in the favor of the North. The most important task ahead was to create a condition and the provision for the unity of union. There were constitutional amendment acts were passed, and this constitutional amendment acts were basically creating a framework for the full rights for freed slaves. Then, franchisee was denied according to the provision to any citizen, or especially on the ground of race and color. So that means it was in the favor of the blacks. Reconstruction Act was passed in 1867-68, and this was also under, the southern states, which were treated as the conquered provinces. That is to be administered by the ministry governors. And it is to be admitted that union only after they ratified the new Constitutional Amendment Act. So it was admitted to the union, which was done only after the ratification of the new constitutional reforms. Efforts were made, to integrate the southern and northern part of America, and America emerged as United States of America. The infrastructural development, the infrastructural projects were undertaken, and a very good example of that was the Great Transcontinental Railway, which was initiated, which was a very important project. So here in this question, you have to write basically the changes that was done, and that changes was mainly in the favor of North. At the same time, some of them were direct and obvious, and however, its indirect effects on American development perhaps even more important. So how America is actually experiencing the Second American Revolution. The first happened in 1776, but it was not implemented, the ideals. But here the ideals started getting implemented. तो इसमें आपको impact बताना है, which is a very period of reconstruction बताना है. Reconstruction of United States कैसे हुआ है, क्या क्या development हुआ है, वो सारी चीजें, development of railway and all those things you need to write down. तब जाकर के ये complete होता है. Then only it gets completed. And this is how the things you have to write here. Let us take a look of the next question. Revolution, whether in Russia in 1917 or in China in 1949, was a disastrous way of transforming the country. Very good question. It is related to Russian Revolution of 1917, especially the Bolshevik Revolution, and Chinese Revolution, Chinese Communist Revolution. Here you have to write the limitation of both the revolution. See, if you try to understand the limitation of Russian Revolution, it favored, only working class, and it, पहले आप Russian Revolution का negative impact लिखिए, Chinese Revolution का फिर negative impact लिखिए. And how Russian Revolution gave rise to communist regime and spread of communism resulted in the the Cold War that has started from 1945 and continued till 1991. So it favors only working class. It does not talk about the welfare of the bourgeoisie class, which actually created a problem with the capitalist section of the society, or the capitalist world, which later developed. So it was against, free trade, private property. It was against democracy and democratic institution. These are the problems. War, communism and its limitation, you have to write. Cold War, which was also a limitation, a war which continued for 46 years, causing an impact on the economy of the world. And it was not, the money was not spent on the welfare activities, rather than huge amount of capital was spent on the nuclear weapons. So it was not a truly Marxist revolution. This is also one of the limitation. तो इसको बताइए किस तरह से चेंज होने लगा है, radicalism आ गया, and the conflict of communist world and the capitalist world. Then you write down the criticism of the Chinese Communist Revolution. Chinese Communist Revolution का क्या criticism है, and here you will write again the rise of communism in a very radical form. The negative impact of Maoism, especially how it acquired the radical form, how this also played an important role in Cold War, which was a negative, has a negative connotation, and how the communist system developed in the Cold War period in both China and so it was, in a sense, it was a very disastrous way of transforming the country. How Maoism was a disastrous way, how, which was one of the variant of communism, how Leninism, how Stalinism was one of the, where freedom of the people were compromised and was focusing only on the proletariat section, that is working class. तो all ये दोनों का आपको limitations बताना है, which will indicate that it was a disastrous way of transforming the country. Europe was at war with itself in first half of 20th century with a long ceasefire. This is a very easy question. Again, a general question as far as the exam is concerned. बहुत ही जनरल किस्म का क्वेश्चन पूछा यूपीएससी ने ये कि यूरोप वाज एट वॉर विथ इटसेल्फ इन द फर्स्ट हाफ ऑफ 20th सेंचुरी. फर्स्ट हाफ ऑफ 20th सेंचुरी मतलब 1901 से आप ले लीजिए और 1950 तक हम लोग लेके चलेंगे. फर्स्ट हाफ ऑफ 20th सेंचुरी. See, here you have to write the factors of First World War. Then you write here the First World War. एकदम थोड़ा सा First World War का factor. Then First World War, which was a crisis again, the conflict of the two power blocks, two military camps in Europe. That was in 1914 to 18. Then you write Paris Peace Conference. Paris Peace Conference and impact of Paris Peace Conference. Focus on Treaty of Versailles and other treaties that emanated from Paris Peace Conference that resulted into rise of the totalitarian state system, and that was done in the case of Italy in the form of fascism, and Germany in the form of Nazism, which was a variant of, fascism. How it created problem, how it was an expression of the conflict within Europe among the countries. Then Great Depression also of 1929, which was a major economic crisis which triggered the political crisis and resulted into Second World War. Then after this, ये 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you will write the Second World War. Then 7th Cold War that began in 1949-45. The friends during the wartime, the Russia and US, they were friends during the USSR and US in peacetime. The Western capitalist country and USSR, they were foes, they were enemies in the Cold War. Ideologically, they were not liking each other before Cold War also. तो इसमें factors बताइए जिसमें आप लिखिए economic imperialistic rivalry was the most important reason for the First World War. Another reason was nationalism. Second, you write about the First World War that was fought in Europe, and it was the fight of the two armed camps of Europe, that is Triple Alliance and Triple Entente. That is Triple Alliance, Austria-Hungary and Germany on one side, and Triple Entente, Britain, France and Russia, later US entered. And then after writing this, write Paris Peace Conference, which was in which the victors of the First World War participated, and they assembled to make peace, but unfortunately they started fighting a war of materialism, and Treaty of Versailles was a very important reason was a very important result of this, which was imposed on Germany unilaterally, and it punished Germany and becomes a reason for the rise of Nazism in Germany, which was a variant of fascism. Italy participated in the First World War by signing a secret Treaty of London in 1915 on the side of the Triple Entente, that is on the side of Britain and France. And when Italy was invited in Paris Peace Conference, she was not treated well. That is why Orlando left Paris Peace Conference that held in 1919 in the midway and resulted into, the rise of fascism. So अब उसके बाद rise of fascism, rise of Nazism लिखिए, because there was loss of prestige and economic crisis in both the countries because of the result of the First World War, result of the Paris Peace Conference, the discriminating treatment that was meted out to Italy and Germany, and finally it gives rise to totalitarian system, which was a very anti-democratic system, and that was also an expression of the conflict between the European countries. Then Great Depression that happened in US and spread to other parts of the world, that also resulted into one of the reasons for Second World War. Second World War was the result of again the imperialistic rivalries, and the major reason was rise of Germany and Italy as fascist powers, and they wanted to take revenge from Britain and France in the Second World War. They wanted to take revenge from US in the Second World War, and it was again a crisis which was an expression of the conflict of the European countries in the first half of the 20th century. Again then Cold War. थोड़ा सा बता दीजिए कि Cold War was fought between the communism and capitalism, US and USSR. That is, US was the leader of the Western capitalist nation, and that was also a conflict among the European countries in the first half of 20th century. This is what was asked. Long ceasefire क्या था? World between two world wars. 1918 में वर्ल्ड वॉर खत्म हो गया, and there was a long ceasefire, but that ceasefire also was was seen that the conflict was still there, and which found an expression which came on the surface in the Second World War. Now the next question, that is impact of the end of Cold War and the emergence of US as a lone power, has been both good and bad. Here the question indicates two things you need to understand: the effects of the Cold War and the rise of US as a lone power, as a omnipower. These are the names given by the historians, the scholars, the political scientists, that what are the important impact of the Cold War. And then the second thing that you have to write, American ascendancy, the rise, the impact of US as a great power. See, as far as the effects of Cold War, तो दो पार्ट में ये आंसर है. एक में effects of Cold War. Cold War end हो जाता है. Cold War was between US and USSR, and this Cold War ends, and there was the rise of US. Second part you will be writing, rise of US. Rise of US, the good effect and the bad again. How the paternalistic imperialism of US troubles the other nations of the world. In the name of spreading democracy, how US spreads its dominance. So in the first part you will be writing the effects. Effects उसमें लिखिए आप कि the Cold War का effect क्या था, कि जो लड़ाई चल रही थी that came to an end. The concept of communist revolution and the dictatorship of proletariat became meaningless, and capitalism emerged as a dominant force after 1991 with the fall of USSR or decline of communism. So end of Cold War gave new opportunities to redefine the international relations. New international relations came up, and there was beginning for the move of Americanization or rise of US as a lone power, as an omnipower, as a hyperpower, and finally US hegemony. तो क्या impact हुआ, क्या क्या चीजें हुई? End of the Cold War resulted in, the process of resolving conflicts and crisis. It facilitated in the initiation of the process of, seeking solution of some of the greater problems because of the collaboration of US and USSR, like, Iran-Iraq war of 1988, then independence of Namibia, in 1988, and then the Iraq and, Iran war, 1988, problem of Afghanistan, 1988, freedom of Kuwait in 1991, West Asia, peace talk happened during this period. So after the end of the Cold War ended the relevance of the old political issues, and the issues like, security, military power began less important, and there was a paradigm shift from economic, to economic, issues like trade, investment, formation of WTO that we see in 1995, and, the new approach towards the economic progress, economic development, rise of capitalism, new economic policy in India also we see. So all this happens. तो इसमें और भी चीजें आप लिख सकते हैं कि क्या हुआ. Then, there was a rise of US as a lone power. Why there was a rise of US as a lone power, and how it was positive for world, how it created, good for world. कैसे कैसे वो अच्छा रहा दुनिया के लिए और कैसे बुरा रहा because of the kind of neo-colonialism that was seen basically, and how America becomes a challenge, or, how it becomes the challenge for the other countries, how it tries to dominate in each and every issue, how it interferes in the name of democracy and spreading peace, all these kind of bad thing that America was doing. In this case, you have to write. So in this American ascendancy, you have to write as how it emerged as a lone power, hyperpower, and its impact. क्या हुआ? Technological development was there, intellectual development was there. Then, development in education, modern political system, institutional development. America becomes the most powerful country of the world with its enormous economic power and great military strength, and how it becomes the role model for other countries that they follow. In each and every aspect, America emerged the powerful nation, and it becomes unchallengeable. Today, China is giving challenge to America. And bad में भी लिख सकते हैं जो मैंने बता दिया, वो सब पॉइंट्स इसमें आप मेंशन कर दीजिए. एंड दिस क्वेश्चन ऑल्सो कैन बी डन. ये कैसे राइज ऑफ अमेरिका का इंटरनेशनल सिग्निफिकेंस है. दिस इज ऑल्सो अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट thing that you have to remember and write in the exam, how it creates a significance. See, emergence of US as a omnipower or hyperpower or lone power in the world, deeply affected the international relation. Emergence of US was, symbolized by the starting of the new phase of the international relation. The rise of US gave boost to democratic forces. It is a positive impact. It gave rise to progressive forces. It gave a setback to despotism, absolutism, and anti-democratic forces that was there in the world, especially in Africa and other countries. Ascendancy of Europe, US was, resulted in the closer, integration of the world. Development of science and technology, development of ideology, American ascendancy, rise of America gave boost to the process of globalization. It played a very significant role in the development of other countries also. लेकिन इसकी कमी भी है. It has, negativity also. How this is becoming very dominant and challenging the sovereignty of other countries in economic aspect. How it becomes aggressive, goes against the national interest of the other countries just to protect the national interest of America. It becomes realist in character. American nationalism, started dominating the course of international politics. The rise of US as a lone power undermined the independent and democratic element of multilateral international institutions like UN. कैसे UN को जेब में लेके घूम रहा है America, and how it started dominating the international affairs. The dependence upon American help made these institutions not bias free, you can say, because whether it is international institution like UN or World Bank or International Monetary Fund or other great organization where the most of the capital is of America, and how it controls in the favor of America, in their favor, how the Americans do that. The ascendancy of US has also undermined the independence and sovereignty of the weaker sections of the society, of the world, like in the case of Iraq, the case of Afghanistan are the good examples of the dominance of America. How the America was in a position to undermine the international institutions, how it has undermined the international institutions by funding them to a great extent, and then can make them play in the favor of America. So this is what you have to write in this case, and then this question then becomes, so you have to mention these two things, and then this is completed. So it is a very interesting question to write, because you have to write in today's context also, as far as the bad impact is concerned for the rise of US after Cold War. Now the last question, and we'll finish this then. Do you think that United Nations organization has played a significant role in resolving the international disputes and ensuring peace in the world? Basically, in this question, you have to write the achievements and the failure of United Nations. United Nations का क्या failure है और क्या achievement है? These two things that you have to mention in this, question, that whether it was actually helping in resolving disputes or it failed, whether it was successful in resolving disputes or it failed. See, in this question, two parts can be made, one for success and other for failure. So in this, you have to write that after the establishment of United Nations in 1945, it faced a number of international issues in the world, and UN was successful in resolving such issues. And then you start giving the instances कि कहाँ पे उसने achievements किए हैं, what are the important achievements of United Nations जब वो बना 1945 में, because it was a successor organization of League of Nations which failed as an organization. And one of the greatest achievements of United Nations is its role in the field of decolonization. It gave inspiration to the millions of African and Asian people that they will be freed from the colonial struggle, that they will be freed from the imperial struggle, imperial rule, sorry, colonial rule and imperial rule. So it played a very important role in decolonization process, and it was, aiming for decolonization. Second is human rights. How UN played a significant role in, human rights, the standards of increasing the norms of human rights. Third, that you can write, how it, formalized the international law and how those international laws were implemented. Then, in 1980, World Health Organization, a specialized agency of United Nations, how it played an important role in, total eradication of smallpox in the world, and, how it played an important role in abolition of or eradication of other diseases. You can also give the example of the WHO in fighting with the COVID-19 case, whether it was successful. You can also incorporate these points. In 1991, the heads of, WHO, UNICEF certified, immunization of 80% of world's children against, the killer diseases like, polio, tetanus, measles, whooping cough. ये सब achievements हैं. But as far as the question is concerned, question किसकी तरफ, किधर की तरफ ले जा रहा है कि whether it was successful in, dispute resolution. The question indicates that whether it was successful in dispute resolution. See, the first major, issue that was faced by United Nations in 1948, and this was the dispute involved in the West New Guinea that was located in Eastern, Asia, and it was claimed by Holland and Indonesia. And, and because of this, the dispute was taken care by United Nations. In 1962, UN passed an order and, awarded this territory to Indonesia. So you write the examples. In 1947, how UN was, UN interfered in Palestine issue, though still UN could not succeed in solving the Arab-Israel conflict, the Arab world conflict in context to Arab-Israel, relation. So in 1947, United Nations also, interfered in Palestine issue. The decision of United Nations in this matter is most controversial. And how it was not in a position to play a role. How it was not in a position to play a role. So you have to write both the aspects. How United Nations was, successfully intervened in Korean War when, North Korea invaded the South Korea in June 1950, and how UN interfered and how the disputes was resolved. During, Hungarian crisis के बारे में बताइए, how this, UN failed miserably in this Hungarian crisis. Then write about Kashmir issue also, how UN failed in Kashmir issue, how, UN could not take a proper decision in Kashmir issue, and it was lingering for a long time, and then, the present government tried to resolve it. Then, in 1964, United Nations successfully, intervened in the Cyprus issues, and it was a British colony since, 1870s and was granted independence in 1960. तो काफी सारा काम जो है यूनाइटेड नेशन ने करा, काफी सारा नहीं करा, तो दोनों चीजों को आप हाईलाइट कर दीजिए कि किसमें करा बोस्नियन क्राइसिस की बात कीजिए. Then you also write about in the current context also what is happening. Ukrainian crisis, you write down. You write down the story of Afghanistan. You write down the things related to Indian subcontinent, how it was in a position to resolve things, how UN succeeded in the long drawn war of Iran and Iraq in 1988, Gulf War in 1991, all these points. तो फेलियर बताइए और अचीवमेंट बताइए. तब जाकर के इसमें दो चीज है, फेलियर और अचीवमेंट इन डिस्प्यूट, international dispute, and how UN was successful in ensuring peace. Okay, so here we end the discussion of paper 2. In one session I have discussed paper 1, and in this session I discussed paper 2 of history optional subject in 2021, the question that was asked in 2021 history optional. And I hope that you must have liked the session, and my best wishes are for the students who have appeared in the exam, and they could get the interview call letter and they could succeed finally also. And to those students also who will be taking the exam next year, the optional exam in the main exam, and they also come out with flying colors in the civil service exam. Thank you so much for a patient hearing.